we were really grateful to have the opportunity to take part in the aspect phobia study. It got my son some help with his phobia, and also we felt that it was really important to contribute to research and with the ultimate aim of helping lots of other people too.
Andrew, when did you first get involved in research and why?
I would say about 5-6 years ago. Just thought, well, if you give any help to anybody and a bit of support and that, and really just to give some information about your past experience, and just correlate that for other people to understand that you might suffer a mental illness, but you're never isolated, really.
And what do you get from taking part in research? Why do you do it?
Just positive feedback and want to give something back to society, really.
What would you say if someone else was thinking about taking part in research?
Go for it. It is important to understand what mental illness is and how mentally ill people like yourself suffer and how we can improve our lot, really.
I was asked initially, I think it came from my social worker at the time, and I was really up for it because it gives me an opportunity to talk about psychosis and about what that means to me as an individual and how it comes about, and looking at finding ways to keep busy and keep doing things to alleviate that. And that's what I've been doing every few weeks when my work through the SEAM project. Research for me is something that is very important, and it needs to be done so that it can be carried forward for other people to watch and to see and to know that it's just an opportunity to understand a little bit more about people who suffer with certain conditions and how it affects them and so on and so forth.
And if someone was thinking about taking part in research, what would you say to them?
I would say definitely do it, because again, the generations and generations that are to come, research, however it's done in the field and however high tech it may become, the face-to-face interview or talk about how it affects you and about how great it is as a tool in terms of not just for myself as an individual, but for other people, including people who do lectures and stuff like that about it. It gives everybody an opportunity to know that there was a human behind the mental health side of the thing. I found it incredibly good and empowering, to be fair.
Research, and I've had a great experience of it so far. It's given me some amazing opportunities and the chance to develop some new skills. It's also really exciting to be part of service development and seeing what the future of mental health services might look like. It's also been a really rewarding experience. It's amazing to build some really meaningful relationships with people that we work with and make a genuine difference in their lives. And on top of that, give them the opportunity to have a voice and a say in what the future of the NHS looks like. Especially since the research team make it so easy as well. You know, they're so enthusiastic, you can't help but feel the same. I think as a patient, there's lots of benefits to becoming involved with the research team. Often it involves being part of a new assessment or a new treatment or even a new type of therapy, which is all quite exciting, and it's something that maybe you wouldn't have received otherwise. But on top of that, Research informed service. Mental health services are changing and developing all the time, and actually patients are the people that should tell us how to do that best. We need to empower you, we need to hear your voices, we need these services to work for you and to be the best they can possibly be. We need to do that together, and it needs to be collaborative. And on top of that, hopefully it's an enjoyable experience. I'd like to hope so. I've always enjoyed being a part of research as a clinician, and I've loved being able to form relationships and work really closely with people. You know, it's been amazing.
I've always been interested in research, especially research that could improve my quality of life and well-being. So when I started working as a peer support worker and I saw the opportunity to become a research champion, I got in touch right away. And I find the research team very resourceful and effective. They're always there to answer my questions and support me in my role as a research champion. So I get the chance to signpost patients to new studies, as well as get involved in some of the studies as well, which I find exciting and interesting. I find it heartening to see how research can change people's lives and offer them some purpose and meaning. Being a research champion also gives me a sense of belonging and a way of giving back to the community, to our communities.
We'd like to speak to you today about shaping the future and how you can play a part in making research more diverse and inclusive.
Help us to understand any potential barriers to taking part in health research so that we can work with people to overcome them.
Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome. Morning.
Take part in research and help give hope for the future.
Sorry, we just got a slight delay because the link, we've had to resend the link out to those people who are dialing in. So we've just got another couple of minutes, so apologies for that, but we're just resending the links, so we'll get that sorted. Technology is great when it works, but it's a bit frustrating when it doesn't, but we'll get that sorted. So a couple of minutes, everybody. Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Michele Moran. I'm the Chief Executive of Humber NHS Teaching Foundation Trust. And apologies for the slight delay. We've had a little bit of a hiccup with the link, but I'm hoping that everybody that's joining us online can now see and hear everything really well. It gives me great pleasure to say welcome to our second day of our 5th International Research Conference here at Humber. It was a great day yesterday, so thank you for the people returning today and joining online, and thank you to people who are here for the first time today. This is the first time we've done a blended approach, and I thank Catherine, Alison, the whole team that made this possible, and the guys at the back doing the streaming. It's never easy to do one conference, but to do two is pretty impossible. Housekeeping rules for if you're in the conference centre. Please maintain mask wearing, please maintain social distancing. There is drinks available, but when you're walking around, please put your masks on unless you're medically exempt. I'm sure you've all found the facilities by now. There are no fire alarms scheduled for today, so if there are any, we meet outside the front door in reception. And please do turn your mobile phones off, because it's really distracting for the presenters. One of my old colleagues, Byrne, used to charge people for charity if they went off for dementia research. So I think that might be quite good since we're at a research conference, but please do switch your mobile phones off. We've got another fantastic session today, and I thank all the presenters for presenting, and everybody that's dialing in at home. I think we've got over 350 people joining us for what is going to be a really fascinating day. It was a great session yesterday, and I learnt lots of things, and I'm sure likewise today. I'm going to hand over, with no further ado, to Dr. John Byrne, who is our medical director here at Humber, and we're surely going to be in for a great session. So thank you all. Good morning, John. Welcome, and welcome to everybody, and please enjoy the day.
So good morning everyone, for all my Irish friends who'll be watching in back in Ireland. So delighted to have some of you on the call this morning. So I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording this event today, so those of you who are joining us online will all get the link. Please feel free to ask us a question using Twitter or the event box chat, and we will put those to the presenters hopefully as we get a chance as we go along. So without much further ado, I'm going to start the conference. We've got a great lineup of speakers today. Their biographies are all on the Eventbrite link, so I'm not going to spend too much time introducing them. But first up to bat this morning is Professor Partha Kar. Partha is an old friend of mine from my days down south, a man who genuinely doesn't really need much introduction, and actually I'm probably not worthy enough to introduce him anyway. But he's lots of jobs, lots of roles, and but the only thing you don't do, Partha, seems to be an MP, but everything else you've got seem to have covered. So we're delighted that you can join us this morning. You're going to give a quick presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A and a conversation after that, because Partha's got so much to talk about. It'd be great for people in the audience or people watching us to ping in a question, and pretty much nothing is off limits. Is that right, Partha? Floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, John. Lovely introduction, very early in the morning. So as John mentioned, I'm going to do a brief presentation and then we'll take some questions. So I've got 3 roles, I think, at the present moment, or is it 4? I forget. So I'm a consultant in diabetes. I've got a full-time job. I work in Portsmouth by the sea. I also am one of the national leads for diabetes in NHS England, have been over the last 5 years. And I've recently taken on a role of Director of Equality across the medical workforce. We'll talk about that. That's a bit of fun and games as it goes along. So yes, so a little bit of what's happening. So I'm going to start with a bit of what fundamentally is changing in diabetes. So first of all, what's changing is what I call tongue twisters. So these sound like they are planets in an episode of Star Wars, but they're not. They're all medications. Somebody comes up with these names, but they're all there. And I think one of the issues with this is we have issues with safety. People come in, not many people are aware of these new drugs coming because they're coming thick and fast. So that's been a big thing. So the tongue twister element of it is all these new drugs coming through, and it's very difficult to keep pace with. So let me give you an example as to why I did diabetes care as a profession. General practitioner, and I didn't do any of those because I tried my hand at those when I was in training, and I was pretty rubbish at all of them. And then they told me, my consultant said to me when I did diabetes, well, this is quite easy. You can ask if it's type 2 diet, Put them on metformin, bit of glycoside, and insulin, done. I said, I could do this for the rest of my life. The problem is that world has well past us. That was in the late 90s, and here we are with all these things. So a big switch change is that we are now talking reversal or remission of type 2 diabetes. And I think because it's a research conference, I also wanted to mention is that does academia make its way into real life? And one of the big trials done from Newcastle and surrounding areas was Roy Taylor's work, showing that actually type 2 diabetes can be put back, which was a massive change of where we were. Because for us, training was all about, got type 2 diabetes, that's it. It's progressive, it's done. So that's now been put into policy and lots of areas are doing it and we're expanding those. There's always the debate about what is the best diet that's ever happened in the history of time. And you always have that, right? You go to any forum, it's low carbs, high fat, low fat, what fat. And I always say the best diet in the world is the one which is sustainable. The rest of it is completely irrelevant. Every study will tell you that. And sustainability is linked with affordability. It's very easy to sit in the world of privilege and tell people to have bacon and avocado first thing in the morning. And I come from an area which can be quite affluent. So you've got Fareham, Jaguars, mink coats in winter. Just across the motor is Gosport, which is the third poorest borough, right? And over there is a mum trying to hold down 2 jobs, and for her, bacon and avocado is basically in the dream. She's more dependent on food banks. So it's important when we talk about diets is what's sustainable. It's not about what you could, because every diet makes you lose weight. There is no diet that doesn't make you lose weight. The key is how do you keep it off. So the question here is the future here? I just wanted to talk a little. So here is some example. Anybody remember this? Star Trek? Yes, 1968, the first episode came out. That was the mobile phone. For those of you who want to do some pub quiz, the first mobile phone was actually named after a planet in Star Trek episode. That's why Gene Roddenberry was called the father of science fiction. Here is Captain Kirk on his iPad. There's your big screen television. Cardiac monitors, all of them came out in Star Trek before it actually happened in real life. And that's Uhura with her Bluetooth technology. Example of that is that, look at that. So that's why Star Trek was so famous. It always predicted the future, right? And I won't even go to the sliding doors. Remember those? I remember you spoke. I would love to walk through one of those. Now it's everywhere, isn't it? So that it predicted everything. So what's happening here? This is what's happened in the UK. There's an explosion of blood glucose meters, but what we've got now is every unit in this country or every hospital now has got what we call a data integrator. It doesn't matter where you are, all the data can come in one place and I can sit and watch it there. So that's been quite powerful. And we're not going to spend too much time because I've got a few slides to show on this later on. But here's how technology is evolving. 1970s, if you had to check people's diabetes, you had to dip their urine, right? Then you moved on to pricking your fingers. Now, majority of cases, you don't. So you now have what we call non-invasive glucose monitoring. This is one where you keep an implant in your arm for 6 months. This is under trial. There is the lenses, basically, which looks at glucose levels. And here are something which I'll talk about in a minute, closed loop, but I'll come back to it. Now, some basics to talk about. Here is what we said in the diabetes. Now, the thing about, I work for NHS England, and one of the big problems with NHS England is commitments made. We make a commitment, and then we can't really deliver it. And then another plan comes along, and they make another commitment, and then another plan comes along. And people always go like, but you haven't actually delivered on the last ones. So we made a few commitments, and I think it's important is that that's the way we're doing it, and there are a few commitments which we have delivered on. So this is an example of what type 1 diabetes is, lots of things. So, do you know why I put that number up? Because this is a fundamental issue with self-management in this country, or sorry, chronic disease in this country. Chronic disease to me sits on 3 planks: self-management, peer support, access to trained professionals. Do you know what the NHS is amazing at doing? It's putting all its effort into number 3. When we actually don't have enough of number 3. We just don't have them. It doesn't matter. You know, at the moment, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. And we were talking last night about locum costs, etc. It's irrelevant. Everybody's poaching people from wherever they can. It's a buyer's market if you're in a locum job. And there's nothing wrong with it. That number is actually the percentage of time a person with diabetes will be with a healthcare professional in a year. 0.01%. And that's actually based on a very generous time given. Okay? There's 8,760 hours in a year. If you pick 4 appointments, each of them half an hour long, which rarely happens, that's 2 hours. That's 0.02%. The point I always makers, and 99.98% they're on their own with their diabetes. If you're not going to help self-management, you're dead in the water. It doesn't matter. It really is irrelevant. It doesn't matter how much resources you throw at it. You can't change it. So what we're trying to do is this. So we launched this device called the flash glucose monitoring, which is basically a little coin sits on your arm and you use your phone to scan yourself. Why is it important? It's important for a simple reason. You can check that as many times as you want. You can have your own data in front of you. If you don't have a phone, you can do it on a reader and you can make your own changes. And trying to get it through the NHS has been one of the, someday I will write a book about it, but it's fascinating how we all have the word N in the NHS, but it's anything but, right? So there were 4 groups of people I met over my journey over 3 years. So we started with that, April 2019, 10% of the country started from, we started at 2018 when it was 0. But this is where we've got to now. The whole country is covered. And at the moment, we're at 53% of the population has got access to this device. We'll get it to 100 as well. The point was trying to get everybody to agree. And this is how it went. There were 4 groups of people when we started off, and that's your innovation thing, isn't it? We launched this device, and they were like, this is brilliant, Partha. We love you. You're amazing. Okay, we're doing it. We're doing it, man. Okay. Then a group 2 going like, I think it's good, but is there really any randomized control trials? Really? Can you give some more data? Right. Then you had group 3, which was like, I'm really tired. Okay, I've got so many things on my plate. Right, everybody else seems to be doing it, so shall I do it? Okay. And then you had group 4 going like, it's not going to happen. Over my dead body. Absolutely not going to happen. Just not going to happen. And I've had a conversation with execs, CCG chief execs, who basically told me this conversation is over. And I'm like, not really. That's not how it works with me. So we got everybody. So it was not a debatable issue. We basically, so what we did a very different type of financial transaction. We said, all right, we'll top slice your money off and we'll give it back to you if you use it. That's what happened. Everybody got their money back. Everybody's using it. Guess what's happened since then? Well, we said we'll collect data. And do you know what it did? Funny that, it dropped all your admissions like a stone. It dropped your HbA1c and it made you feel better. People's quality of life improved. Guess what? Do you know what's happened during the pandemic? One condition where admission rates absolutely plummeted. It was diabetic ketoacidosis in type 1 diabetes. Some of it because a lot of the youngsters weren't going anywhere. They're at home with their mum and dad, so they had to have food, not be on a party, etc. A lot of it has been down to a self-management device being available to them. So here is what education, and this one, a couple of more examples. Education, do you know what is the standard of education? Was the standard of education type 1 diabetes? This is how it works in this country. If you want to have education, you need to come and see me on my dates I have chosen. And if you don't come along, you are not going to get further access to anything else. Right, let me show you some data. We are brilliant at referring people. Nobody turns up. Nobody turns up. 4% of people turn up. We refer 70%, which is amazing. So we said, we're going to change that. When we went and spoke to all the academia who at that, but this is where I think you need to have a balance of academia and what you're trying to, all the research people said, no, the research says, Partha, you need to be in a classroom. And they go like, yes, but there are people saying, I don't want to be in a classroom. What do we do about that? And they said, no, they have to be in a classroom. I said, well, but it's 2021. Come on, we need to change this. And we did. So we said, all right, we will land a digital platform for everybody, free, across the board, everybody with type 1 diabetes. And at this moment in this country, everybody with type 1 diabetes has access to the self-management platform. Kids, adults, guess what? It's absolutely gone through the roof because people find time. Because I always say to clinicians, how many of you, if you are type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and I said to you, you need to attend on these days, dropping your work, because work does not give you time off. And guess what? It opens up your deprivation index. You know, I need the job to pay my bills right now. And you're saying I need to stop my job and turn up for an education session. So when we have technology in this country, you can't get a type 1 diabetes technology unless you do education. But you can't get to the education because you've got work to hold on. Guess what? A black child has got half the chance of a white child of getting a continuous glucose monitor in 2021. Half. Not decimal points, half. Absolutely half. Right? So if you're going to set up barriers which doesn't take into account deprivation, and I think I'll make it very, very clear because I do this work, deprivation is not equal to ethnicity. And I've gone blue in the face telling people this. They're two different, and I'll give you an example of a company who said we are really working hard to close the deprivation gap. And I said, well, brilliant. How are you doing that? And they said, we have done some videos in Gujarati. And I said, that's brilliant, but it's not going to help in Portsmouth because nobody speaks Gujarati there. So what are you doing about the fact that they have is not access to internet or a laptop? How do we do that? So those are the issues. And here are some of the online tools. So I'm going to finish with this. Here are 3 big trials which was done. DIRECT was the trial which shows remission of type 2 diabetes. It is now a national program. Every area, this is fundamentally the plan for type 2 diabetes. Try and see if you can try and prevent, reverse, put into remission. It's not going to work for everybody, but it's certainly what we call research into life. Second one was HELP, and that was more about digital use of type 2 diabetes, which is being rolled out. The big one for us was CONCEPT. CONCEPT was about pregnancy. It showed that if you gave pregnant women with type 1 diabetes a particular device which alarms continuous readings on your phone, because you don't have to track it, don't have to prick your fingers, everything, you get better mortality rates of infants. It's as straightforward research as that. So right now, every single type 1 diabetes mum in this country has access to this device. And we've done it by having deals with the companies, making sure the price index works for us, etc. as well. So we're working on closed loops, and I'll finish with that. That's the artificial pancreas that we talk about. And can you imagine a child, 5 years old? What is the main thing that parents tell us? I have to stay awake at night because I don't know when she'll go into a low blood sugar and what will happen at night. I just stay awake. I'm scared. What does closed loop do? It takes it out, gives the parents sleep. So we're doing a trial across the country. Do you know what's the feedback from parents? I can sleep. That's as simple. You don't need any other metric to improve. You have improved the quality of life. And I think that's quite important. So, and the final bit, I always say, anybody in academic sector, and I've said this to everybody in the diabetes world, show me the evidence, we'll make it happen. But you've got to show me the evidence, not like 3 anecdotes. That's important as well. So I'll finish with that. And any questions, John? Thank you very much.
Any questions? Well, I've got loads of questions, but I think the chair's prerogative is to start with the audience. So I will go straight to Mike Smith. So just if you just introduce yourself, say who you are, and ask the question, please.
Thank you. I'm Mike Smith. I'm non-executive director at the Trust. I'm classified as a type 2 diabetic. I control it by diet. It is under control, or at least was. No one will believe me. My surgeon for a serious foot operation predicted double the recovery time. After 2 weeks, he said that's not a diabetic foot, that's an ordinary foot. So it can be done. Doesn't help when you come to conferences like this and the only thing that's available is sweet things, because information is king. The number of people I speak to who've got type 2 diabetes who say, oh, I know when my blood sugar's high. It's a blind killer. They do not know. I'm really hungry for information because the serious injury has raised my glucose levels, hopefully temporarily. But I'd love to have something like this to have been able to chart my progress, because in hospital what happens is they still do the prick tests. They write it down on a scrap of paper, then they transfer it to a machine, and we're just losing out on this availability of technology.
So, to that question, I think the question is, what about type 2 diabetes and having this sort of technology at their behest? Why just type 1? So, end of November, you will find out. We have asked exactly that question to NICE because we put it into type 1. There's some good evidence from around the globe about type 2. So, NICE are doing that assessment and they're publishing their document for draft consultation, I think 24th to 26th, because we have specifically asked that question. Type 2, where does type 2 sit with this technology? Now, if you ask me, this is just a moment of time, because this will become the technology over the course of time. I think it's about the way how to get it into the NHS, is because it's public funded and everything. But end of November, keep an eye out for that, and please do respond to that document as well on their behalf.
So thank you, Mike. Partha, there's a lot of money involved in healthcare, isn't there? A huge amount in the pharma industry. How does somebody like you, who's very influential, you know, you're obviously a target for people who want to bring all sorts of great science and wacky science to you. Can you talk us through what it's like being chased down?
I think it's a balance, and there's plenty of people in this room who have been in the business long enough. It's a balance you strike, whereby I think there's also an assumption that if you're doing something, you're linked with industry. So then if I even have a fraction of what people think I've earned from industry putting this technology, I would not be here. I would be on a beach on my own yacht being parked, right? But I specifically stay away from it because I know that the debate becomes very black and white, because people go like, well, you spoke to the company, you're done, right? So there is that aspect when you directly, so I don't at all get involved in any commercial dealings with, and it puts you in a really nice space because you can negotiate with them price tariffs. Now, then the other bit is you're being lobbied, and I think you get lobbied a fair bit from all quarters. So that's always an interesting thing whereby you're trying to say that you don't want to offend somebody because they're quite influential, quite big, but at the same time, how do you actually say this product is pretty crap, right? And there has been a lot of products in diabetes which we have batted off, to be perfectly honest, because the claims that have been made are pretty ridiculous. And I'll give you one example. I was talking to both of you last night. Somebody came and said, if you put your finger on this app, the glucose comes up. And I went like, okay, that sounds amazing. How does it work? And they were like, we'll come to that later, but can we have a national contract? And I went like, how does it work? And they went like, it just works. And I went like, okay, that's not really, I am actually a clinician, believe it or not. You've got to explain some science. Have you got any publication? They said, no, but we're in the process. So I think people's jump, but those connections are made by people of influence. They don't just come up to me. So I think the job then becomes to say politely, like, okay, maybe you need to do more work, maybe do some publications, peer reviews, MHRA, NICE, that sort of stuff. So I think there are many ways you can do it, but it's a tricky space to be in. Let's put it that way.
So it'll all be in the book.
It will all be in the book. It's been yes. NHS England comms always ask me, is there really a book? And I go, oh yeah, there's a book. I think I'm going to call it Sugar Rush.
Sugar Rush. Any other questions in the audience? It's Faisal down in there.
Thank you, Professor Kar, for an interesting lecture. My question is about, you made reference to the remission from diabetes, and I have read about the 800 calories diet and so on, in reference to the patients that we deal with and the high risk of pre-diabetes or diabetes secondary to psychotropic medication. Is there anything that you advise about remission and maybe advising our patients?
So we're going to do a piece of work specifically into mental health. We're looking into mental health institutions. We know about the impact of drugs in that particular and the impact of type 2 diabetes. I think the 800 calories, which the Daily Mail famously named as the soups and shakes, I think that's what the headline they went for. I think people forget two things. One is, if you look at all studies, including the 800 calorie diet, which you referred to, at 2-3 years, it really peels off. It's really difficult to maintain. I don't know how many of you here have tried a diet. It's just impossible to maintain, right? And I think that's the challenge. So what I say to everybody is that if you're going to recommend a diet, please speak to a dietitian, because they can give you help with sustainability. I can give you a diet which will make you lose weight tomorrow, which would be like, don't eat. But that's ridiculous. That's why I'm not a dietitian, okay? You need to speak to the people who know their craft. Just because you've read a few journals or been on Google or done a few podcasts or written a book doesn't make you a dietitian. So I think it's important we recognize this. So my advice is, think about referring to a dietitian who can give you sustainability around the plan. That's the key.
So, because we've got significant problems in mental health with significant mental illness, we know that people tend to die sometimes 20 years earlier. Simon Gilbody has regularly been down to us to talk about that healthcare gap, bringing that all together. We've got a talk later on linking diabetes. Oh, no, don't give away the secrets. No, they will have read the programme. They know you're coming up. But I suppose I'm sitting here thinking is, what can we in the mental health space learn from what they've done in diabetes with regard to technology, particularly picking up your self-management, 0.02%, and how do we support people to live their own healthy lives, and can we go into that space in mental health? So it'd be interesting to see what you can do from that diabetes perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest frustrations I've always had in my 5 years or so at the national role is this physical and mental health separation. You know, I mean, I do diabetes clinics every day, and you're sitting there going like, okay, this is not something I can do. I just can't help you. You've got a massive issue which needs mental health support. So I think going back to your question, there are a fair few things so if you talk about improvement of quality of life, does said that mental health well-being improved because they just felt more secure. So the new device has got alarm. So people who are really worried about the fact that I'm just going to have low readings and I'm going to be ill. So what we say is that, right, set your alarm a bit higher, and you could see them come back and say, I just feel better. It's not that the diabetes is improved, but the mental health improves. It's a matter of time before the diabetes improves. And I think we spend too much time in the diabetes world. We always go like, well, what's the HbA1c change? And I always go like, yeah, but if you improve your quality of life, HbA1c will follow. So, I don't think we've gotten that space of thinking yet, because think about any drug or any technology, the first question you get back from any medicines management is, well, what's the HbA1c change? And I think there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen, and that change quality of life, the rest will follow. And I think it goes back to, and we're trying to work with mental health teams across to see what we can do, whether it's IAPT, whether it's psychology support. Goes back again that we don't have enough psychologists either in the system. So that's a massive problem. But I think there's those bits that we can learn, I think.
So I'm just going to flip then into your new role with regard to equality in your medical leadership role, and just ask some of your thoughts on institutional racism. You mentioned privilege, white privilege, and your perspective on that going forward.
So I've been 6-8 weeks in this new job and trying to feel my way. So I'll make some clear observations, and these are observations, right? It's in the NHS. It's not a nice place to be a woman. It's not a nice place to be a woman of color, and it's even worse if you're a woman and who is black, right? That's pretty much my first 6-8 weeks observation. I think there is a massive level of, I think sexism, racism, there's a massive intersectionality as you go along. We still are very, very boys' club in a lot of spheres, and I say this having worked in many, many sectors. I've worked in community trusts, acute trusts, NHS England, CCGs. And as I was saying last night, I don't think we can change the narrative binary as white and non-white in this country. That's my personal belief. You need to have a much more nuanced debate. There is a problem, right? And my position has been, looked at the data and I said, okay, so for example, GMC referrals, there's a clear gap based on your ethnicity. And what I say to every single chief exec and area and go like, do you agree that there's a problem? And they go like, yes, let's change it. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how you get to it. But I can tell you for a fact that every single consultant I've spoken to who have picked up the phone because they have been bullied, because they feel that chief exec haven't listened to them, every single one of them is a woman. Every single one. Senior consultants in the NHS, and you listen to their stories, what they've gone through with their divisional director, their medical director, the chief exec, and you're going like, okay, 2021, come on, this cannot be possible. So I think white privilege is something that comes up because we're in a white dominated country. Okay, let's not forget that. But I also think we need to be very nuanced about it, because let's not forget about South Asian people. I come from a South Asian background. I know exactly what our community does, for example, to black people, or the level of degree of misogyny our culture holds if you come from where we are and the way we have looked at women over the years. So there's lots of layers to it. But I think I want to take a much more simple approach. Well, here is the data, there's a gap. All we're saying is make it equal. So example being, as I was saying, you should refer somebody to a GMC and it gets to the point. Put it into an independent panel, take away all the protected characteristics, let the panel decide. Take away the fact, their sex, their disability, their race, take it away. Make the call on patient safety grounds. If you have to refer to a GMC, do that, and it doesn't happen. And finally, I think little subtle changes like going to the pub, playing the rugby, it nicely correlates into certain groups. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody can do that. So if you're my medical director, thank God you're not, but if you were, and you found something about me, your first response would be pick up the phone, Partha, let's catch up for a beer, let's just have a chat. You wouldn't be able to do that with a lot of other women who may not be into that culture, or men. So I think you straight away have that degree of bias introduced. So I think it needs to be much more flatter if you go across. But I can't see any reason why not. I mean, 6-8 weeks, I've only had, I can only say good things about people's intention to do it. And as I keep on saying to people, the data will tell you about your leadership. And somebody said to me the other day, oh, we've got these amazing leaders in our ICS. They're amazing. And I went like, they're amazing if they've done it. Otherwise, they're not. That's how it works in sports. Yeah. Alex Ferguson was great because he won trophies. Steve Bruce isn't great because he didn't win anything. That's how it works, I'm afraid. So,
any. So next question to the audience will come from Caroline.
Thank you, Caroline Flint, Trust Chair. That was a really interesting contribution this morning. Thank you very much for that. I just want to know about how, any thoughts you've had about how, we could sort of fasten the pace of technology getting to those who need it. And, given your experience here, which is really positive and obviously it's progressing well, based on your experience, what roadblock would you like to remove? And is the attitude of health professionals to accepting a different way of managing and working with their patients an issue in all of this?
Yeah. So
you might get NHS England on board, you might get the money on board, but what if those on the front line just aren't willing to change their habits?
Yeah, so I'll answer it backwards. So number one, I think we have a problem in the way we have done the whole system of clinical engagement. There's no question about it. We've had to produce a document in diabetes telling clinicians to be nice. I'm not even joking. There's a document called Language Matters. Do you know what it says? It says, okay, just be nice. Don't be, okay, you spend only a few moments with them. Can you not be rude and just talk about you've done really bad, right? Simple things like that because they believe. So I think there is a massive issue there. I think on board, so there, clinicians by nature would want to see the evidence. I think the biggest roadblock in technology, I think, is the pace at which we accept change. We are accustomed to NICE doing things at a certain pace. And as we have said to NICE recently, the pace at which they go for technology, they would have just approved Betamax. While we are going like, okay, thanks very much, that was really helpful, right? But they would have, that's the pace at which they work. It's not their fault. They are not trained or in a place where they can do technology quickly. In fairness to them, we are leading a little bit of the tip of the spear of showing, so we've done this closed loop trial, we've done it the other way around. We have said to NICE, we will collect data for you in the centres on one protocol. It's not research, it's real world data evaluation. You do the data for us within 3 months. Tell us if we did the right thing or not. If we failed, we failed. So we have invested money in doing, and I think that's the way to do it, because once you, so we've done it across all deprivation indexes across the country. And that's what we want to show. So I think if that flies, that flies. And now what we've got in parallel with that, we've got this group called the Accelerated Access Collaborative. We have said to them, your job, if NICE gives a green light, what are the blocks that will stop this from rolling? And one of the blocks is clinicians. And we know that. And just to give you a finish with that example, one of the work that we did was went around all the hospitals looking at diabetes departments. And we went to one place whereby the total number of pumps being given to the local population was 0. I mean, it was 0. And I went like, that's pretty low. And they went like, oh, yes. I went like, is it the CCG? Because they're the evil. They went, oh, CCG. No, CCG. So why is it 0? And they said, and this was their consultant colleague with their medical director and chief exec, who is my colleague as well, who said, very happy to do it when NICE approves it. And I said, yeah, they did 12 years ago. So they are 0. Well, if you then are in guys, it's 42%. That's the gap. So I think clinicians, so we need to tackle, I think that's where you need clinical, and I'll finish with this bit because I think this is quite important, which I think we lose sight of in NHS England. You need clinical leaders who are doing a lot of clinical work. You lose credibility on the ground. You do. It's easy for me to step in and go like, okay, well, if you're saying I'm doing it, why can't you do it? You need more clinical leaders who will do little part-time or whatever, but without that credibility, you can only rewrite documents, you can't implement it. That's my view.
So that was a whirlwind through diabetes and race, and glad you didn't spend too much time talking about diets. My wife has a view on that, but I won't be going into that in a public sphere. So it's interesting that as a trust, we have developed our research over the last 4 years, which is why it's brilliant to be able to segue into our next presentation, which, my glasses gone, is from Jennifer Brown and Gary Hellewell, who's a research participant. And this will be based on diabetes, mental illness. I won't steal your thunder, but this is part of the work we've been doing in the trust over the past 4 years. and mental health together, because we know there's a gap. So Jennifer and Gary, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jennifer Brown. I hope my slides are coming up from behind back there. That would help. Otherwise I have to, yes, there we go. That's the University of York, looking very, very pretty and picturesque. So my name is Jennifer Brown. I'm a research fellow in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of York, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Gary, who is going to introduce himself.
Yeah, my name's Gary Hellewell. I'm a Diamonds Voice member, and I've been involved since 2015, when it first started.
We will explain what Diamonds Voice is and how we work together as we go through the presentation. So it does segue very, very nicely on from the previous presentation, because we're here to introduce you to the Diamonds Research Programme. And a bit like the previous session, we are going to have a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what the work is that we're doing. We will speak about Diamonds Voice, and that is where Gary will really come in to share his experiences, and then we will open it up to discussion. I'm really looking forward to your questions. Now, Diamonds is a little bit of a tortured acronym. It sort of stands for Diabetes and Mental Illness Improving Outcomes and Services. You can see it doesn't really work. But the name is stuck and we've rolled with it. And I've put our web address and also our Twitter handle on there for you guys to check out and follow us along if you want. And the Diamonds research team is led by Najma Siddiqui, who's a professor of psychiatry at the University of York and also consultant psychiatrist at Bradford District Care Trust. She is the chief investigator for a 6-year program of work into severe mental illness and diabetes outcomes. And it's a publicly funded project of work. We're about halfway through due to the events of last year. We've got an extension. So at the moment, our predicted end date is the spring of 2025, which seems an awfully long time away, but we've got a lot of work to get through. So other members of the team are myself. I'm the program manager for this work, which kind of means I keep the show on the road, keep everybody organized, and make sure we get through what we promised the NIHR we would do. Angie Ross can't be here today, unfortunately, but she is our Diamonds Voice lead, and she plays a really crucial role in building that connection between the Diamonds Voice group and the research team and making sure we work together effectively and productively. We've got a program management team that includes, for example, Simon Gilbody, who is very prolific in this space of physical and mental comorbidity, so physical and mental health problems that come together. And it also includes diabetologists from across the country, mental health experts, primary care, and a whole range of disciplines that work together with us in this space. We're overseen by an independent steering committee to make sure we deliver what we promised the NIHR we would deliver. And we obviously have a fantastic team of research and admin staff who help us actually do the work day to day. And will the video play if I press the next button? Excellent. Before I keep boring you by just talking myself, we're just going to watch a quick animation to introduce the Diamonds program in 90 seconds.
To improve diabetes self-management outcomes for people with severe mental illness. Type 2 diabetes, known as T2D, is more than twice as common among people with severe mental illness, known as SMI, compared with the general population. People who have SMI and T2D also tend to be more poorly than people who have T2D without an SMI and experience more side effects or complications. In England and Wales, there are over 60,000 people living with both conditions. This means that more people with SMI also are D. Those living with SMI tend to die earlier than the general population. Often, problems due to conditions like T2D are related to those early deaths. Working in partnership with service users and carers, the Diamonds research team have developed a bespoke support program for people with severe mental illness, SMI, and type 2 diabetes, T2D. The aim of the program is to support people with SMI and T2D to make small changes in their lives which will help them manage their diabetes better.
So, if you paid attention previous talk, we're touching on quite a lot of the same things there: lifestyle changes, self-management, all that kind of thing. So, diabetes care for people with severe mental illness really shouldn't be any different from diabetes care for people without a severe mental illness, because the NICE guidance recommends that everyone who receives a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes is referred to a diabetes education program. Now, it doesn't say exclude people with severe mental illness. Now, we know that standard education programs such as DESMON, for example, are clinically and cost effective in the general population. They work if people attend them. The problem is that they are delivered in such a way that doesn't meet the needs of people with severe mental illness. Key problems that we know are issues and barriers for this population to act, that they're delivered as group sessions, there's a lot of content, and there's a certain assumption of health literacy, or general understanding of how to be healthy, how to look after oneself. So we know that there is a clear need for a bespoke diabetes support program for the population with severe mental illness, and to make sure that we develop something that actually works, and that's the whole point of the Diamonds program, is we need to understand exactly where the challenges lie. We need to work with service users, carers, and healthcare professionals. This isn't something that we as academics can do sitting in our ivory towers, and we need to go out there and speak to the people who are affected, but also to the people who we want to deliver whatever we come up with. Once we've got an idea of what might work, we have to go and check that it does work, that it is acceptable and feasible to deliver within the context of healthcare in this country. And then finally, we want to know if it does actually make a difference to people's lives and if it's cost effective. At the moment, we are sort of in that sort of first stage of testing, because we have developed the Diamonds intervention, and this centers around trained Diamonds coaches, so trained intervention facilitators who deliver 16 one-to-one sessions to our study participants. We've developed a workbook and an app to support a goal setting and action planning, and like the animation sort of alluded to, the focus is on small and sustainable lifestyle changes, which again links very nicely to the first talk we had this morning. It needs to be sustainable. The app we developed is actually called Change One Thing, because it's about changing one thing at a time and sticking with that rather than trying to overhaul one's life entirely. This is currently being tested in 6 NHS mental health trusts, Humber being one of them. And this is a feasibility study with 30 participants. It's also a chance for us to test run our study procedures before we roll this out in a main effectiveness trial. Now, Diamonds is a child of its time. The grant application was written, I think, in 2015. At that point, it was definite that the primary outcome would have to be HbA1c. I think we are open to the idea that that might not be all that we're interested in. This is the contract that we're currently asked to deliver to based on the funding that was given. But there is obviously a lot of other things that this intervention might change. We're going to aim to recruit approximately 450 participants, and that trial will include a control group who don't get the new intervention. And that trial is due to start spring, summer next year. Other work that we've got ongoing is an economic evaluation of the Diamonds intervention. As part of my PhD, Diamonds will be the first study that offers the Libre continuous glucose monitors to this population with diabetes and severe mental illness. And we are then also looking to translate our findings to other long-term conditions such as COPD. But now, to talk about Diamonds' voice and their absolutely instrumental role that they've played in this work. They are a service user and carer group. They've been part of Diamonds since the very beginning, 2015-16. We're based in Yorkshire. There's about 8 to 10 members of the group. We meet regularly and have one-off events. We've obviously had to meet online recently, but we used to meet up in person. And last year we finished as runners-up in the NIHR, MECPIN and MQ awards for service user and care engagement in mental health research. And now I'll hand over to Gary to just tell a little bit more about his lived experience of being part of Diamonds.
Yeah, like Jen was saying, I got involved through pure accident actually. So I live in South Yorkshire, and this is done in West Yorkshire and through the York University. It was just a questionnaire, and I actually went to York University and filled in the questionnaire while we were there, and they mentioned regarding a Diamonds programme, see if I want to get involved, because I didn't know at the time that diabetes and mental health coexisted. So now I have comorbidities, and that's what we call it. Then we've got or multimorbidities, and it's really opened my eyes, tell you the truth, because I travel, like I said, from Rotherham in South Yorkshire to these meetings, and I love it. I haven't turned back since, because I used to be involved in through the Rotherham, Doncaster and South Humber research, and I didn't really get anywhere with them. So we're joining the Diamonds programme, and Jen, it's really opened my eyes. Like I said, this changed one thing. Obviously, I'm trying to improve my my diet as well, but obviously I do have periods where I do have the anxiety, the depression. I should have spoke last week to around about 51 people on Zoom at York University about my part in research, but I had a really bad day last week. So that's my part, and now I'm getting involved in another study, what we're going to be starting, called the Primrose study, which is looking into mental health and heart condition. So onwards and upwards for me, hopefully, while I'm still alive.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I'm really pleased that you're able to join us today, and don't worry about last week. We all have bad days sometimes, and it's just the way it goes. But yeah, I mean, we've got Irina, for example, was meant to be here today as well, and she's not been well enough to attend either. So we do think, we believe very firmly that we need to work with the service users and their carers to make our work relevant and appropriate. So some of the ways that Diamonds Voice are involved is, for example, by question setting, making sure we ask the right questions before we go out and start collecting data, representing the team at events like today. They have helped us produce our participant-facing documents. So what is the paperwork that we're giving out to our study participants? Does it make sense? Is it readable? Is it, delivered in a format that is inviting and accessible? We're working together on the website, the workbook, the app, all of those things, the intervention were developed in collaboration with Diamonds Voice. And what is also really fantastic is that many of the Diamonds Voice members, including Gary, are championing research in their respective trusts and sort of broadening that participation and just the relevance of the research that is being done.
Any questions?
So, Jennifer and Gary, thank you for that. My first observation is that if you'd gone to a research conference 20 years ago, there would have been no chance that anyone from a patient or service user or carer background would have been allowed anywhere near the podium, because we, I dare say, in healthcare particularly, are very paternalistic in our approaches. So it started, co-production started to become the language of about 10 years ago, but you can see how long it's taken to sort of actually involve the co-producers in some of this work, which is great to see with this particular programme. And I note your comment about Desmond and actually how we sort of support people to look after themselves, and Partha touching that with classroom-based stuff. And we've got a recovery college here in Humber, and actually it's perhaps something for us to think a little bit more about, because we do some medicines optimizations or medicines management sessions as part of our recovery college, which is great. So, you know, we just have to think differently if we're going to close that health and social inequalities gap. So those are my thoughts. We do have some time for some questions from the audience. There is nothing that's come in line. So just, here comes the microphone.
Great to see you here, Carrie. Yeah. My question is directed at you. By the way, I'm a PACE governor for NHS Humber, so I'm very much in the lifestyle and the stuff where you're at. Can I just ask you, though, are you involved in any way with recruitment of people for the programme, or involved with your trust in recruiting people with the patient and carers experience agenda?
I suppose, in a way, it's like word of mouth, with asking people to see if they want to be involved without putting too much pressure. Because obviously, it's like with this app. What, you know, these are professionals, academics, whatever they call them, right? But us as layman people, we say, excuse me, we don't understand that language. We'd rather put it down in our own language, where even the clinicians know what we're saying. So that's through the PPIs, public and patient involvement and engagement services. So that's what it's all about, just word of mouth.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Most powerful things we can encourage patients and service users and carers to do is ask their clinicians, is there research I can be involved in? Because that actually, I think, then puts the onus on us as the clinicians to think about getting involved in research, because the evidence is that those trusts that are research active have much better outcomes. So I think part of the message isn't just about clinicians doing the research, encouraging the patients in terms of the activation to go, why am I involved in research, or what are the opportunities for me? Because that forces us back into our Partha.
Not a question, just a statement, which is to say that we would love to know more about this as it comes through. So I don't think you should get too worried about HbA1c. It is what it is. But we are wider. We are quite keen to look wider. So, for example, we have now set Libre available to everybody with learning disability, irrespective of their type. And SMI is certainly an area we're looking into. So, you know, look forward to, and that might help further with your recruit. Say to people, the more you have, it makes the database more stronger for us to then sort of roll it out, so to speak. So yeah, I look forward to it. Do let us know.
So I'll give you Partha's private mobile phone number, and I'm sure there'll be a bucket loads of Libre on the way to the research participants. You did say that, Partha. That's what you meant. So we got some comments. Okay. Right. How much weight have you put on recently, John? No, we won't be asking that question. Comment from Alison. Fantastic thought, thank you. You made a great point about wealthy and poor folk having different challenges about diet choice. How do you tailor a management program for two different groups? I think you touched on that, Partha, didn't you? Thinking about, you know, the privilege piece. Another, Partha, tell us something we don't know. And another comment has come in about Gary. Thank you for sharing your story. over time. Is there anything else before we give ourselves 10 minutes to have a break and a catch up? Any final questions? If not, I'll just close this particular session and to thank Partha, Jennifer and Gary for joining us. And I think it's fascinating how, I think for one of the first times ever, we've really been able to link strategic changes in physical health stuff, diabetes and tech, and then actually follow that up with the conversations about what's happening in the mental health space. And more importantly, how we in Humber, and this is a flag for Humber, are actually engaged in that particular element of research, which is saying what we said we'd do with regard to our approach to research over the past couple of years. So thank you very much for everyone who's involved, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. 30 seconds. 25. 20. Ladies, 15. Well, this is the first. I'm on time. So, are we ready to go live again? So, welcome back, everyone. Hope you've all had a chance to hop to the loo and have a cup of tea or coffee, or depending on where you are in the world, perhaps something stronger if the sun has gone past the yard arm. So, we're now moving on to our next session, and we've got Professor Kieran Walsh, who's the Professor of Health Policy and Management at Manchester Business School. So, Kieran, you'll be joining us virtually down the link. So, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit more about yourself. I'm intrigued by your Irish-sounding name, so perhaps you'll just let me know if there's any sort of link there to being Irish or Celtic. That always sort of cheers me up. And then we'll hear about your research. And then we'll just take some Q&As, but just to say we've got Professor Partha Kar in the audience today in person, so we'd love to have a wider conversation about some of the locum issues that you're picking up in the early research. Who's going to shout at Kieran and say he's on mute?
You can hear me now then, can you, John?
We crystal clear. Good morning, Kieran.
That's good. I just need to now get back to my shared presentation. I don't know whether, John, you can help me get the presentation back on screen for myself, because I can see myself. Great, I can now see myself on screen. I can see my presentation in the room. Yeah, as I was saying, John, yeah, I am indeed half Irish and a proud holder of an Irish passport, which I got when Brexit happened, I have to say. Yeah, and delighted to join you for the conference. So my background is I'm a health service researcher. I've worked in the health service as a researcher, but originally actually as a manager, and then at the King's Fund at a think tank in a research role for most of my career. But I've also spent time working for NIHR, running one of the big standing research programmes, and I'm currently spending part of my time seconded to Welsh Government as Director of Health and Care Research Wales. So a real interest in seeing research used in the NHS and seeing the research that we do changing policy and practice in ways that matter. And I guess the project, John, I'm going to present is in some ways a bit different from some of the others that you might have in your conference today, in that it doesn't have a particular focus on a clinical intervention or a therapeutic area. It's very much an organisational research project, and it's about something that I think is really important to healthcare organisations and to the quality of care for patients, and that's the use of temporary medical workers or locum doctors in the NHS. So, John, do you want me to go ahead and present?
Yes, that'd be great. So just to say that we're really pleased that you're talking about it from a broader field, because one of our strategic aims of our approach to research was to think a little bit broader than just physical health, mental health, and to think about and get involved in broader research. So that's one of the reasons we're presenting this, because I think we're actively involved in the study, Kieran, that you're leading. So over to you.
Great. Yes, and indeed, many thanks to people in Humber who've taken part in the research, because as you say, you're one of our case study sites, and we've been interviewing a range of people. So I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes. I've got about 20 slides. I'll just try and give people a picture of the, hang on. This is where I have to make sure that, yep, you can see. I'm just having to check whether me moving on is actually working for you, and it is. Brilliant. Okay, so I shall just put that full screen and move the slides on. So yeah, I'll talk briefly about why we think this research needed to be done, and then give you some early findings. The project's about just over halfway through its 2-year life. So there's a lot of interest in locum working, not just in doctors, but in other clinical questions as well. It's got a lot of salience because the number of people working as locums has grown. In 2018, there were around 9,000 doctors whose primary job was working as a locum. In other words, they're connected to locum agencies. There are a lot more doctors than that who have, if you like, a staff position somewhere, but also undertake temporary work, some locum work in other organisations. And we've done a couple of earlier publications about this, which are up there on the screen, and you're very welcome to go and pick them up. And I don't think it's unfair to say that locums are perceived fairly negatively by a number of groups, and have been presented quite negatively, including by, big NHS organisations like NHS England, perceived as, not committed to the NHS, interested in money rather than in providing good patient care, untrustworthy outsiders. And we titled one of these papers, "You're Just a Locum," because that's what locums told us, that when they went into organisations, what people saw was not their original professional identity and their experience, but they saw them as a locum. And there's been a suggestion, but actually there's very little evidence of this, that locums may present a higher risk of causing harm to patients. And we do know that there are more complaints about locums than there are about permanent doctors pro rata. So we set out to do 3 really straightforward things. One of them was to look at the nature and scale and scope of locum doctor working in England, using some survey data which we're currently collecting, but also using existing data sources, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Secondly, to try and understand how the way locum doctors work affects issues of safety and quality of care. And that's mostly a qualitative research project package. And thirdly, to actually use the data we have to try and understand differences in clinical practice and performance between locum and permanent doctors, to pin down this question about the effect on safety and quality more empirically than anyone's done in the past. So those are our three basic questions. So what do locums do and where are they? This is a slide using data that's collected routinely by NHS Digital from all practices in England. The general practice workforce census, which is collected on, I think, a monthly basis actually across all practices. It's a data set that's very little used actually, and has got lots of interesting potential applications. But in this case, we've used it to look at where are the locums working in primary care, how does locum use vary across England, and what characteristic might be associated with locum working. And what I can tell you is that about 3%, oops, didn't mean to go on, about 3% of total general practice care gets provided by locums. That is quite a lot, though, as you can see from my story, that it, particularly in London and also in rural areas. We've also been able to look at characteristics, and we can tell you that practices that use more locums tend to be more likely to be single-handed, and that practices make use of locums. We're doing more work in primary care that I'll come back to in a moment. Similarly, in secondary care, every NHS trust in England provides a huge amount of data to NHS England Improvement on their use of locums, and that's a data set that I don't think anyone had really made much use of before for analysis, and we're doing that at the moment. And what you can see here is that locum use again varies hugely across trusts. This is all 208 trusts in by locum use, measured as, it's a slightly odd measure, the number of locum shifts they have per week per total medical FTE. And again, what we can see here is actually about 4% of medical staffing in those trusts is provided by locums, but it varies greatly. And again, we're looking at trust characteristics at the moment. This is an analysis we're in the middle of, but we do know that trusts which are less well rated by CQC, that have an inadequate or requires improvement rating, make more use of locums. I'm going to move to focus mostly in the rest of the presentation on the qualitative casework we've done. And here we've undertaken over 100 interviews across quite a range of organisations in primary care and in secondary care in NHS trusts of different types, including those working in acute and mental health and in community services. And we've also undertaken focus groups with patients. Their experiences of care from locums and their perspectives on treatment by locums. And I'm going to just pick out a small number of themes, about 5 or 6 themes out of that qualitative data set to talk about. The first one is that it's very clear that the way locums perform in organisations is largely determined by how organisations organise their use of locums, which you might think is pretty obvious, but comes really strongly out of the data. So what you put in a sense, in terms of your investment in, treatment of and support of locum doctors, makes a big difference to both their experience of working, but also to their ability to work and to perform. And that you will see as a theme that comes through in a number of my subsequent slides. You know, it's that point I think made nicely in that quote on the right-hand side. You know, depending on us being treated on an equal footing and with respect, it's not that we should be second-class citizens without being given the chance to become first-class citizens in the organisation. And it's worth thinking about, what does that mean? How should we, as organisations, use the locum workforce? Because there's no question that locums are really important, back to the sort of wider system issues around the workforce crisis, but they're important to flexibility, to being able to cover gaps, being able to deal with vacancies, being able to cover holidays and leave. Locums are important, so how should we try and use them? One point that comes across strongly is that organisations need to think about how they manage the risks associated with care and how they can standardise their use of locums. And that's partly a responsibility for organisations themselves, and also a responsibility for the organisations that provide locums, locum agencies and banks and so on. What we see quite strongly in the data, I think, is that organisations have shifted towards organisation. So many NHS trusts have moved in their practice away from using agencies towards using a variety of internal staff banks where they use locums who are known to them. And interestingly, I think that's always been in general practice, suggests that most general practices try to use locums who are known quantities. For example, retired GPs who used to work in the practice, GPs who have worked part-time and have some flexibility, GPs who are known to them through their informal networks. That comes across really strongly. To the way information flows, I want to say two things about this slide. Information flows within the organisation. It's about enabling needs. It comes up on a sub care pathways, access to clinical guidance. But it also comes up when we talk what happens if
problems at this end. Hearing you, I'm just wondering, would it be worth your while dialing out and dialing back in and see if the link works a little bit better? The old turn on the computer, turn off the computer trick.
Do absolutely.
So I think we will just take it that Kieran has just dropped out for a few seconds and hopefully he'll be able to dial back in. But I think we've heard some interesting points from Kieran with regard to the use of locums and how they work. So Partha, it's apt that you're probably in the room. Do you have a personal perspective, bearing in mind you have to run services too, on what you've heard from Kieran so far on the role of locums? Yeah, please do.
I think, and those of us who have been dealing with locums, I think Kieran is absolutely right. Some of it has been over the years where I think the way we have looked at locums and treated them as just helping hands to come on. And now the whole market has flipped around, whereby without the locums, you can't run the services. So people are in a position whereby it's a buyer's market. So people
they rely more on the short-term locum piece, particularly at a junior level, to fill those spots and fill those gaps that we wouldn't necessarily have so much of a problem with within the mental health sector. But when we think about our medical staffing, we probably have a locum agency rate of 25%. But interestingly, those colleagues, and I use the word advisedly, colleagues, come on a Monday and they're still here next year or in 2 years' time. So they tend to be long-term colleagues. And I'd regularly hear my sort of colleagues at board challenge me, well, why don't they just become substantive consultants, John? And it will save us a whole load of money. And I go, yes, it would. And it would be lovely if they became substantive consultants. And I don't think it's for the want of trying or the want of asking at an organisational level. But have you had any success in Portsmouth persuading our colleagues to jump back into the NHS at a substantive level?
I think a couple, yes. Majority, no. That's the honest truth. Because if you forget everything for a minute, and I know we always do the rhetoric of doctors, you know, doing that for the greater good and the whole ethos. Let's not forget that there are lots of doctors who will basically say, I'm sorry, but the money is important for me. I will provide you fantastic care when I'm here, but I'll take the money also as well. And I think if you're pitting it against, you will a lot of people, that's not an issue, because they might want to work in this country for a few bit, earn their money, leave. So in which case, that's not a major issue. The couple we managed to convince has taken a lot of time and effort, and I think we have had to also give quite a fair bit in return. It's not just clinical, you have to make space for them to lead services, make them feel, and I think that's also an issue, is what else are you putting on the plate? And that's the sort of position we found. So we've got a couple who have now become substantive colleagues in GIM, which is like gold dust. But we have given them some leadership roles. For example, there is one gentleman who came from Bangladesh. But what we've said is that why don't you look after all the IMGs? Take on a responsibility of trying to coach these guys who are coming from different countries, feel a bit left out, lost. Why don't you help them out? So that's been something that we have managed to lure, so to speak, for want of a better word, into the system. But it's not easy at all. I think Kieran back.
Is Kieran back? Fantastic. Welcome back, Kieran.
Hi there, I am back, but I'm not sure how much of what I said you got.
So you were on the Venn diagram slide, which cut out, and for those of you who know Hull, the Venn diagram I think was invented in Hull from memory. So you were just talking about some of the research work which you talked about linked to that particular Venn diagram. In the meantime, Partha and I have just had a conversation where we've been discussing how can we encourage people who are locums to perhaps become substantive consultants, and we've just kind of thought it's really difficult despite all your best efforts. So back over to you wherever you want to take off again.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to try and use the slides, and I'll just talk for the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes. I'm conscious of time, but you can share. You're very welcome to share the slides I provided, because the next few slides were essentially about the qualitative work that we've done. So I can kind of talk to that without having to have the quotes on screen, if that's okay, John. And give me a shout if Teams lets us down in any way. So coming back to the research. The cost of locums is something that you were just mentioning there, Partha and John, that the idea, the perception that locums cost a great deal of money, and so if we're going to have a locum, we have to make them work 100% of the time. We can't, send them off to do CPD or involve them in MDT meetings or have them doing anything apart from hands-on care. And that does come across quite strongly in our data. And there's no question that locums cost more than fully appointed medical staff. Again, what you're seeing in many organisations is an attempt to move away, driven actually by NHS England and Improvement, move away from using agency locums, who are the highest cost ones, and to move to using internal staff banks and other ways of accessing staff, NHS professionals being one example. Of course, that's easy to say if you're a big trust, like some of the big teaching trusts, who have done things like create hybrid role posts, which are partly a clinical research fellow, but also a resource for somebody who can provide flexible cover and cover shifts that would otherwise have to be covered by an agency locum. It's a lot harder to do if you're in the parts of the country where recruitment is really problematic and where there is a sort of a history of long-standing vacancies. And you see that in some service areas, mental health being a good example, but you also see it in some geographies where it's just been much harder to recruit. I wanted to sort of just finish on a couple of slides around the sort of issues of risk and the responsibility for kind of managing risk, because it's pretty clear there's a lot of things that organisations can do to enable locums to practice more safely. So that's, and a lot of this is embedded in existing guidance from NHS England, not all of which is necessarily closely followed by organisations, but providing familiarity and induction for locums so that they are introduced to the organisation and its ways of working and know what it is that they're there to do. And have access to all the information systems. I mean, in trust, this is everything from EPRs and order comms through to access to things like trust networks, which contain all the clinical guidance and pathways and prescribing guidance and so on. Thinking about scope of practice and what it is that we ask locums to do, and make sure that the asked to fulfill actually matches their skill set. Thinking about what happens at the beginning and end of the employment relationship with the locum. So that's partly about onboarding them, as I've just described, and checking their credentials and all those things. But it's also at the end of it, being good about providing feedback both to the locum and to the agency or provider about the locum and how they've performed. I mean, what comes across time and time again in the data is that if locums don't perform well, or if they're perceived to be problematic, what organisations tend to do is simply to terminate the relationship and do nothing much more about it. Now you can understand that, but actually that's a real problem for the NHS as a system, because then that doctor may simply go and work somewhere else. And locums complain that they don't get feedback on their performance, that they're not helped and supported, that in a way they're a bit set up to fail by organisations. And locums tell us that they avoid working in organisations that they perceive as unsafe. So their own experience of working in an organisation sort of shapes their willingness to go back there. And that seems quite important. A lot of this relates then to the sort of, in essence, back to my earlier slide, you get out what you put in. If you invest in making the locum belong, then they are much more likely both to perform well and also to want to come back and work in the organisation in the future. There's a lovely quote which I'll just read out because I thought it kind of encapsulates this. If they offer you a cup of tea, you feel like royalty, and then you really know that they value you. Whereas the opposite is actually what's often happening. You turn up and they go, "Who are you? I didn't know about you. I don't know where you're going. Where are you going?" You know, and then, "Okay, here's the computer login. Off you go." And that quote from Locum sort of summarises that issue. I'll finish by saying this. The project's ongoing, and we are collecting some really interesting data about the ways organisations are seeking to make locum practice both safer and more effective and better for locums as well as organisations. But the next phase of the project, we're also using data to explore that question of whether locums and permanent doctors perform differently. We're doing some of that in secondary care using EPR data from one particular organisation, but most of it is in primary care, where we're using CPRD, the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, a big database of general practice electronic visit information, to look at questions like whether patients who come and see a locum doctor come back to the practice again within a certain period. In other words, do you get a repeat visit because they were not content with their earlier visit? We're looking at whether or not patients who see a locum doctor are more or less likely to make a subsequent A&E visit, more or less likely to be to go back into to go into hospital. And we're using the prescribing data in CPRD to try and make some comparisons for particular patient groups around prescribing practices by locums and permanent doctors. So there's lots more I could say about the project. I think, John, I should really stop there because I've overrun my time, but really happy to discuss it and answer any questions I can. And apologies for the problems with Teams.
No, brilliant. I think you have a resilience in action this morning, Kieran, overcoming some of the technical challenges. So any thoughts or questions from my colleagues or visitors in the audience about the locum challenge? Michele, I'd be surprised if you didn't put your hand up. I was going to ask you a question, so brilliant.
Thank you. Good morning, Michele. I'm Chief Executive, and I'm sure John knew I would be really interested in asking a question. Really great presentation. Thank you. I suppose you touched on my interest at the end, which was about the outcomes and if there's any data in different performance between locums and substantive. So I think you've touched on that, but anything else you could expand would be really helpful. But also, if you're finding a difference between longer term locums to shorter term, because we tend to find we're using longer term locums. But what always interests me, and you may or may not have, is the reasons why, we've touched on it a little bit when we were dialing back in, but the reasons for doctors to be locums and how we can move away from that. And then finally, I suppose, for me, if there's any good examples, because we're constantly trying to look at our governance, how we structure things, how we support locums, but also how we try to move them into the trust contracts. So any good examples of that would be really helpful as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Michele. I like that. That's like 5 questions in one, isn't it?
Kieran, welcome to my world.
Yeah. Answer on the sort of issues of quality, I'd say 2 things. One is there are very few studies out there. We've had one decent study in the US, which interestingly didn't find much difference between what they call locum tenens doctors and permanent doctors in morbidity and mortality. But that's one study in our review paper, which I put up on the screen earlier. We found very few empirical studies of this, but an awful lot of kind of pejorative opinion about locums. But the second thing I'd say is that if there are differences, they're probably more about how the organisation sets up to use locums than they are about the characteristics of locums themselves. We do know that, I mean, and you referred to this, locums, we're talking about them like they're a homogenous group, and they're actually really heterogeneous. You have everything from doctors who are in a training pathway, and Partha referred to this earlier, who've decided to take time out for a year or a couple of years. You have doctors who are working part-time and have therefore some flexibility, and they're choosing to do that often around family or other carer responsibilities. You also have some doctors who are towards the end of their career and are choosing to locum rather than be in a substantive post. And you have some doctors who can't get a permanent job and are therefore locuming. And as you said, you have some locums who are doing everything from a sort of weekend shift in A&E in an acute trust to someone who's doing a six-month locum as a consultant in an organisation that can't fill that permanent vacancy. And so we shouldn't think of those all as the same. The issues are probably greater with the people who are most temporary. So the shorter term locums and the people who move from organisation to organisation a lot, that's probably where more of the issues around the quality and safety of care occur. So it's sensible that organisations are, and we see this in our data, trying to move to use locums in a more kind of semi-permanent way. In other words, have trusted figures who they bring in, have their own staff bank, and have relationships with a smaller number of locum agencies and locum providers where they can establish some kind of continuity of relationship. I missed out one of my slides, which was to say that in many ways locum agency working, or the growth in locum working, is a product of 2 things. It's a product partly of a changing way, the ways people want to work, and so NHS organisations probably have to embrace that and be better at offering flexible working opportunities for people who would otherwise go off and be locums. But it's also a product, and this isn't an easy one to fix, it's a product of work intensification, and people feeling that they are no longer willing to stick the challenges of a substantive post. And that's a much tougher one to find a way of solving, because certainly in our data, and it can be familiar to probably many people in the room, we see many examples of people who say, well, you know, I was in a substantive post as a consultant in A&E for 10 years and I just couldn't take it anymore. And if I work as a locum, I can come in, I can do my shifts, I can enjoy the clinical work I deliver, and I don't have to deal with all the other stuff that I had to deal with. And you see that in primary care as well. It's part of the shift away from people being partners to being salaried doctors in primary care as well. So that's really hard to fix, but it is an endemic system problem, and it's part of the workforce crisis that we're all talking about now, especially in the light of the sort of post-pandemic recovery.
So Kieran, thank you for that. I think Michele covered some of the areas there, but we could talk all day about this. I think my one observation as the medical director would be, I think we're preoccupied in the NHS in believing that there's a nirvana. And there was a time when we were fully staffed and fully recruited. Well, I've been in the NHS now for about 20 years and was in the army prior to that, and I can't remember anywhere ever being fully recruited. So perhaps less of the sunny uplands from the past, and we just need to think this is the new paradigm where locums are actually a valuable part of our workforce, and focus less on the actual financial cost and just think about how we can make the quality better. But it's not easy for me to say that, particularly when we're burning cash as an organisation. We have to keep the lights on and we have to keep the services running. So it's one of those difficult knots. So Kieran, Slán go fóill, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Hopefully our support of your research project is doing what you needed to do, and undoubtedly you'll promise to come back to us next year and tell us how you've got on.
And it would be nice to be in the same room next year.
Yeah, that'd be great. So Slán, we'll see you again. Thank you, Kieran. And now we've got Dan Kelleher. Dan, apologies, we've slightly overrun with the technical problem, so please forgive me. With a name like Dan Kelleher, you probably have some Irish relatives in there too, do you?
Yeah, brought up in Scotland, Irish heritage.
Irish heritage, you know, if you're spotting a link here this morning, folks, Partha was slightly different coming from Dudley, but we could adapt everything else. So brilliant.
Exactly.
So
thanks, John.
Dan, I'll let you introduce yourself, and we're really looking forward to your talk. But actually what you're doing is you're taking us back to our roots here to talk about mental health and particularly dementia. So we're looking at the future and other stuff, but actually we want to go back to our roots too. So thank you, Dan.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. I'll do my best to try and keep us to time. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dan Kelleher. I'm a research assistant and PhD student at the Centre for Applied Dementia Studies at the University of Bradford. And it's really lovely to be back here in Humber this morning. I started my research career here with Catherine and the team. So it's a real pleasure to be back hearing about all the high quality research that's still going on here. So today I'm going to be talking about the New Interventions for Independence in Dementia study, or NIDIS. So I've been quite ambitious with my presentation, trying to fit quite a lot in today. So there might be a few slides I move through quite quickly. I want to give a good overview of the study and everything that's going on. So NIDIS is a 5-year research programme funded by the Alzheimer's Society. It's a centre of excellence which is led by Professor Claudia Cooper down at UCL. And really our main objective is to develop and test 2 new interventions, one aimed at family carers and people living with dementia in the community, and one at paid home care professionals, kind of on the front line working with people living with dementia. And the background to some of this work is that most people living with dementia want to remain in their own homes for as long as possible. And often this requires support from family carers or paid home care workers. Often it's a combination of the two. And unfortunately, what we know from the research is that care at home often breaks down. And unfortunately, this tends to be in crisis, and care home transitions end up becoming a requirement rather than a choice. So NICE guidelines recommend psychosocial interventions to support independence for people living with dementia, but the reality is that in practice, very few people actually receive these. And when we're talking about psychosocial interventions, some of the things that we know are helpful are things like programs that include active choice, so collaboration with people living with dementia and family carers being involved in their care, and an individualised tailored support meeting their own individual needs. And it's things like environmental adaptations, thinking about the practical changes in the home that can make a difference, and also really importantly, some communication and coping skills training for carers. And thinking on the professional side of things, so as I say, people often rely on home care workers to remain in their own homes, but the Alzheimer's Society released a report back in 2015, I think it was, as part of their Fixed Dementia Care campaign. in there. So from people that they spoke to, only 2% of people living with dementia believed that their home care workers had sufficient dementia training. Only 2%. And if we think of some of the other statistics there, so we saw 1 in 3 home care workers had no dementia training, and those that do receive it often tends to be a very limited e-learning module, which doesn't really go into the depth which is required. And those numbers are quite astounding, considering that 60% diagnosed dementia. So a majority of the people that are being worked with, and that number is likely to be higher when we factor in people living with undiagnosed dementia as well. So really this is identifying a gap in terms of training provision, but also an opportunity. We're thinking about home care workers are in a fantastic position to offer person-centred support in the community, and we need to invest in them as a workforce, give them the training and the skills that they need to be able to do the job that they're doing in a really complex and difficult conditions that they work in. So in response to this, within NIDIS, we've co-produced 2 new interventions. As I say, one is aimed at family carers and people living with dementia, and one aimed at home care workers. And our overall vision is that these 2 interventions link in together to build that network. So today I'm going to be talking about both. NIDIS Family is our main programme, so I'm going to be talking a bit more about that, but I'll talk a bit about NIDIS Professional as well. So we've got a bit of a roadmap, and this was a fantastic idea which one of our PPI members gave us in terms of having a nice clear view of where the study's been and where we're going. So we started off at the beginning of the study building the evidence base, and then we used that to co-produce the intervention. So that's working with experts by experience and clinical colleagues to put together some of the content. And really, so NIDIS Family is manualised. So we've got lots of different manuals that we choose from, and the co-production group were really essential in terms of kind of helping us develop that content and making sure that the language we used and valuable to them, and it covered things that are important to them. So we co-produced the intervention, and then we piloted it in a small group of around 15 families, so between Bradford and London, and that was just to get a sense of whether it's something where it needs to be. We got some feedback from participants, so we could then refine the intervention, refine the materials that we're using to get to the point where we're at now, and we're delivering a randomised control trial. Large scale across the country. We're aiming to recruit 297 family dyads overall. I think the last time I had a look at the numbers, we're on to about 210 roughly at the moment, so we're getting there. And Humber, as always, have been fantastic at helping us recruit to that, so thank you again, Catherine and team, for all the support. We're still open to recruitment, so up until May next year, we're looking for new participants. So if there's anyone out there listening to this that you think might be interested, please do get in touch with Catherine and the team, or with myself directly, and we can talk. And after the May, actually, already we're meeting with our implementation group and thinking about, if NIDIS Family is effective, how can we make sure that it's actually adopted in practice, which often tends to be the issue, as we know. So key objectives and cost effectiveness. NIDIS Family and routine care versus just routine care. And we're looking at 6, 12 and 18-month follow-up with dyads. And we'll also be doing some qualitative work to get some feedback of the experiences, people receiving the intervention and of those delivering it. Okay. So just quickly thinking about some of the inclusion criteria. The real strength of NIDIS, I think, is the flexibility. So the intervention we've developed is able to be tailored to the individual needs of the participants. So it's not an intervention which is aimed at An example here of one of the goals that's been set in the study around activity. So unsurprisingly, given the context of the pandemic as well, where people's support networks, regular groups, any contacts we're having suddenly weren't available, we've had a lot of goals around maintaining activity, and particularly family carers worried about their relatives maintaining levels of stimulation and activity at home. So with this diet, we said at baseline, they were saying, oh, really it's just 30 minutes a day overall that the person living with dementia is actively engaging and enjoying an activity. Outside of this, it was maybe just things like being sat in front of the television, not really actively engaging in those things. And for both participants here, that was something that was important to improve upon. So we captured roughly 30 minutes, and we asked them what would be a meaningful improvement and a realistic improvement. And nice and simple, let's take it from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. And that doesn't need to be 60 minutes in one sitting. That can be throughout the day in different forms, different activities, and that would be a meaningful change in terms of the goal. So we create a slightly better situation, which is our goal, and then even better than that, if we can get more than 60 minutes, fantastic. That's a really great outcome. And we also want to think about how things get slightly worse. Because this is an outcome, we need to measure change both ways. So again, what would be a meaningful reduction in that activity? So for them, if it was not every day, and even if it was still 30 minutes on some days, if there were days where there was no activity and no active engagement, that's a meaningful reduction for them. So I'm going to get through a couple of the other examples just because of the time and talk a bit more about our intervention. So as I said, the goals are our main outcome, but the goals then also dictate the intervention. So those that receive it receive a tailored package. So we have a range of modules that we choose from. Each participant would receive the same first session and the same final session. And between that, we pick out different topics that feel relevant to them and relevant to the goals. And it's about talking through those sessions, helping them work towards those goals and identifying some practical strategies that might be able to help. So it's up to 8 sessions over a 6-month period. And really the main thing is just that the intervention is completed before the 6-month follow-up. And again, we've got some flexibility in here around, sorry, some interruptions. Some flexibility about the time frame. So sometimes it can be weekly, fortnightly, once every 3 weeks, depending on availability. It's delivered by people like myself. So I'm a psychology graduate, but I don't have any clinical qualifications. So in terms of the cost effectiveness of the intervention, I think that's one of the strengths. And I'm supervised by a clinical psychologist within our team. Usually this would have been delivered in people's homes, and that's how we piloted it pre-pandemic. And we were due to start the trial April 2020, and very quickly adapted to remote delivery. I'm actually really proud of how the team managed that and quickly adapted our processes. And I think because the intervention itself is manualised, it's one of the strengths. So we can send out a manual in the post, and I've got one in front of me, they've got one in front of them at home. If we're on the phone or on the video call, we can work through that manual together, and that provides some structure to the sessions and helps us kind of standardise each session, even within that tailored process. So in terms of, as I said, picking out the intervention, I'll show you some of the different modules we've got in a moment. And we're really flexible about who's involved in the interventions as well. So this is something we negotiate with each dyad at the beginning, depending on circumstances. So it might be that it's appropriate to include the person with dementia and the family carer in the sessions. It might be that there's some sessions where it's more appropriate to deliver that to the carer only, and that's dependent on the goals. I'm really thinking about not having sessions where we're going to be talking about things which would be distressing for the person living with dementia, and also giving the family carer some space to talk about the things they need to talk about as well. So we negotiate that on a session by session kind of basis. So we've got some of the sessions here. So this is a list of our different modules and a record of which ones have been most popular so far. As we see, long, massively popular module is the managing mood and identifying enjoyable activities. And again, I think we've had a lot of goals around activity. So that's not surprising, and that those sessions are really about helping people understand mood and how mood can impact activity levels and apathy, motivation, identifying some different level of activities and matching those to mood and supporting people through those. But you can see from the slide, we've got a range of different topics from sleep and diet, down to communication, carer well-being and support. So we'd pick a selection of these different topics in negotiation with the dyad around what feels relevant. So the trial's ongoing, so we don't have any results to share today, but we do have some comments that we've picked up along the way that I'd like to share with you. So there's a few here, and if you want to have a little read, particularly like the one under the picture here. So sessions have allowed me to accept the current situation and understand why my husband can't do certain tasks. And that's made it easier for them to adjust their expectations and reactions. So thinking some really powerful changes there for a carer in terms of understanding the needs of their husband and being able to adapt their approaches. And people generally have really valued the space to reflect on their situation, to have some conversations with the professionals and talk about the things that are meaningful to them, rather than us sitting down and telling them what to do. We're being led by what's meaningful to them. Okay. So I want to talk a bit about NIDAS Professional as well now. So within NIDAS Professional, again, we've looked at the evidence base and co-produced an intervention. So that was with people living with dementia, family carers, home care workers, home care managers. We all got together and said, right, what do we want to include in this dementia training package? What would be helpful for home care workers to know? And we produced a 6-session training program, again, about an hour each session, and we've been delivering those in the pilot via Zoom. It's designed to be delivered to a group of about 6 to 8 home care workers. So keeping the group size small enough so that we can manage some discussions within the group. So we delivered this to one group of home care workers in Bradford, and did some qualitative interviews with them about the experiences. And we're now at a point where we're looking to do a randomised feasibility trial. So we're looking to recruit 3 home care agencies, 2 of which will receive the intervention. And I guess one of the key aims of this feasibility trial is to look at the linked interventions. So within the agencies which receive the NIDAS Professional training, we'll be asking them to approach some clients to receive NIDAS Family. And what we envision here is that in the training sessions, we can be saying, okay, so your client has got these goals that they're working towards in NIDAS Family. How do we support them? How do you, in your role as a home care worker, understand their needs, understand their goals, and help them work towards those? So just some quick feedback. So obviously we did some qualitative evaluation, and we've got our themes down the left of the slide here. So the overarching theme was that home care workers appreciated the time and space to reflect on their work. Unsurprisingly, we heard lots of stories about dashing from visit to visit to visit and really just doing and not having any time to reflect on what they're doing, thinking about those interactions and think about how those interactions could be improved as well. So people valued that time and space, even though the training itself was something extra in their day. And they also really appreciated the space to talk with colleagues. So, and that was something that they weren't getting elsewhere. So lots of lone working in home care. So being able to share experiences with colleagues, talk through real world examples and share their own experiences as well, felt really valued. We also in the training wanted to encourage people to reflect on situations differently. Think about breaking down a behaviour, understanding what's going on and approach it differently. And that was something that came out in the analysis, was that people felt better prepared for challenging situations because we talked those through in the sessions and gave them some strategies and ideas of how to handle those situations if they do face them. So they felt better prepared, more confident, and also more valued in the work. So this is a really undervalued population. With very little training, very little support, and actually in the first session we spend some time thinking about the importance of their work, the skills that they already have and the skills that they're using, and helping them feel more confident in actually you know what, we do a really great job, and we have a lot of skills already, and let's think about building on those. So I think I'm close to time here, so I'm going to move over now to some questions. So we've got my contact details as well around the slides for anyone that wants to get in touch. If you've got any questions, I'll be around today as well.
So Dan, apologies, I've stolen your time. However, I think it'd be remiss of us not to have at least one quick question from the audience, because I have an observation. So does anyone in the audience have a quick question? Oh, my one observation is going to be, while we're sorting out the microphone, with the collapse in social care at the moment, I wonder how many people that you're training up from a professional point of view are still going to be there in a year, let alone 2 years, as they flee the market to work elsewhere. You don't have to answer that, it's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think it's something we'll be looking at in the trial, is looking at staff turnover, working with the agencies to look at that, and ultimately the aim of the programme is to think about staff retention. If people feel more valued in their work, they can envisage a career in home care, then they're more likely to stay in the jobs. Yeah. Jean.
Thank you. Fascinating study, badly needed, brilliant stuff. My question is, how were the professional workers funded?
So how are they funded?
How were they funded? You mentioned the time and how much they appreciated that. We see a lot in the press, and we know it's happening. They're rushing from one job to another, and it's often about dishing up the medication and clearing off. Sorry.
So I think you're right. Yeah. So we have lots of agency workers. We have lots of part-time staff working 0 hours contracts in home care, and we wanted to be sure within the study that we weren't contributing to that and to get people for free. So we funded the agency for staff time. Made sure that any time that was given to the training programme or to qualitative interviews was covered, so that there was no extra cost there for the agency, and also the staff weren't missing out in terms of work. In terms of how they're funded generally, it's not for me to say. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jean.
Message understood loud and clear. At the end of the day, if we don't invest in people, and that includes pay, they flee to work in other places. I think that's taken as read. So look, Dan, thank you very much for that brilliant run through. We're going to take a 4-minute break because our next two speakers will be virtual and dialing in, and they are on very, very tight timelines. So there'll be less guff from me, but we'll see you back in 3.5 minutes. Stop being a naughty boy, Leah. So folks, we're going to start again in 20 seconds. Okay. So welcome back, everyone. Apologies for that very short break, but sort of some technical issues, so we just had to catch up with time. So next up, coming down the link, is Professor Tim Kendall, who's the National Clinical Director for Mental Health. Now, Tim will be known to quite a few of you in the audience and online, and he normally hosts his own sort of chat show every Wednesday morning. I think it's about once a month or so, Tim, isn't it? I've never managed to make your A-list for that particular show, so we've decided to host our own event and invite you along instead. So we're delighted that you can join us this morning. We're looking forward to hearing about some of your observations, and hopefully we can have that conversation down the link between yourself and some of our colleagues in the room just to pick up some of the more pertinent points. So welcome, Tim.
Hi, can you hear me?
Crystal clear.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much. And I should say, just so the audience has a complete picture of me, apart from being National Clinical Director, I'm also a consultant psychiatrist for people with mental health problems who are homeless in Sheffield. Which I've been doing for the last 10 years. Now I understand that what you wanted me to talk about was the future of mental health and the future of mental health research. So I will try and do that in the next 15 minutes. I want to caveat this by saying that what I'm going to say will be positive. But you need to understand that when I came into this job in 2016, we were actually only seeing 1 in 4 children who had a mental health problem. So if you went out into the community and you interviewed people door to door, children door to door, you'd find that there are 4 times as many people with a diagnosable mental health problem as you would find within mental health services. And for adults, it was about less than 40% that were being seen. Now that has changed, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that whilst I'm going to be very positive in saying that things are improving and they are getting better, we're starting from a very low base. And that base, you know, we have not finished what I think of as our long-term goal, which is to get mental health to be up at least the same place as physical health. Okay, so I'm going to start with the long-term plan very briefly. Back in 2018, this is after we'd already got significant investment in the 5-year forward view, which was about £1 billion extra per year. So in 2018, the then Secretary of State, Jeremy Hunt, and the Prime Minister agreed a 3.4% increase for the NHS year on year, which amounted to, by the end of 5 years, by 23-24, would be that the NHS would be £20.5 billion per year better off. Next slide, please. What the NHS was then charged with was to set out a long-term plan that would spend that 20.5 billion. And of that 20.5 billion, 2.3 was ring-fenced for mental health. And when I say ring-fenced, this has been a major issue from our point of view, which is that never before in the NHS has any budget been ring-fenced in this way. So basically, it meant that as the money is passed on to the CCGs, that they had to hand that on to the mental health providers and be able to demonstrate that they were spending that themselves. Next slide, please. So this is what the long-term plan laid out. So they're essentially targets. This doesn't look like a strategy. It's not a strategy. It is, in fact, a set of targets that we agreed we would see, 350,000 more children, young people, and that we would do that partly through CAMS, but also through the development of a brand new mental health service for children, which by 2027 will mean that we've doubled the size of the workforce in children and young people's mental health. That means they've gone from 8,000 up to 16,000 approximately. But a major area for the long-term plan has been community mental health. So whereas the 5-year forward view covered a lot of things, but it didn't cover community mental health, we were very clear that the long-term plan had to have at the heart of it community mental health. So for adults and older adults. So what that has meant is that for every 50,000 population, so for every PCN size, primary care network, of 50,000 population, we will be investing an extra £1 million in community mental health, and another 300,000 will be going into crisis in the community. So that's for every population of 50,000, amounting to 1.3 billion for the entire population of England. Okay, you can read the rest on that slide yourselves. There's lots of other stuff that we're doing. Next slide, please. So this is what I see as really what the long term is about strategically. So next one. That's it. First one is to create more and better alternatives to institutional care. So the investment in the community is to get rid of the gap between primary and community care. And that is indeed what it's doing where it's happening. So next slide, please. So it's also to thereby reduce our dependence on institutional solutions. If you put people into psychiatric units, into hospitals, there are some real downsides to that, as well as some upsides. The upsides that people are safe, that we've got the possibility of intensive treatment and so on. But the downside is that people don't want to be there more often than not. And we use things like the Mental Health Act, which are often felt to be very unpleasant. Next slide, next point. So the next thing is to integrate mental and physical health care. So that's not just at the primary care level, but at second, right through secondary healthcare services, on working with acute hospitals and on working with primary care to ensure that the physical health of people with mental health problems is addressed, and that we address the mental health needs of people with physical health problems. Next point is to help mothers and children and young people. There's the long-term plan is across the age range. I don't know how much people will know, but I'm sure you do know this. 50% of mental health problems for adults start by the time you're 14, 75% by the time you hit your early 20s, and virtually all of it by the time you hit your 30s, virtually. So helping people when they are young is pretty key, and helping mothers of young children is also part of the long-term plan. Next one, timely access. So what we are doing is trialling 4-week waits across community mental health, and our aim is in the long term is to get to the point where people can get timely access for all mental health treatments. Next slide, please. Now, everyone will know that the pandemic hit not just people's physical health, but it also hit people's mental health, partly because of the anxiety that the pandemic provoked, the fear, partly because of loss, and partly because of lockdown itself. So the mental health problems for children has gone up, so that by 2020, July 2020, we're up to about 16% of kids with a probable mental disorder. That's the Office for National Statistics numbers. I think there's also been pretty much an explosion in the eating disorder. So in under 18-year-olds, we've had a doubling of the number of kids going into urgent treatment over a period of a year. And again, as anxiety, depression, and people with existing mental health problems significantly suffered during this pandemic. Next one. So this is, again, read in your own time because we need to move on to research. We got an extra 500 million from the government to cope with the mental health impact of COVID. Basically, we have used it to accelerate the long-term plan. So increasing recruitment of staff and so on. Our aim in terms of staffing is we've got nearly 20,000 extra staff since 2016. We now want to add an extra 27,000 staff by 23-24. Okay, next one. Now, one of the things that we've done is to try and get the research agenda in mental health to line up with the needs of service users and the development of services in the long-term plan. So we set up this thing called demand signalling, funny name, but we did it with NHS England and Improvements Mental Health Policy Research Team, a bit of a mouthful, but basically we got a whole load of people, experts by experience, experts in research, experts in the clinical area, to get together, set some standards, and then to refine these in a second workshop and turn them into research questions. Next slide, please. So these are the two workshops that we got. These were separated because of COVID by about 18 months. But you'll see number of lived experience in workshop 1 was less than it probably should have been. But this was corrected by workshop 2. But we did nevertheless have quite a lot of academics in workshop 1. There weren't so many people in workshop 1. We're talking about 20 odd people, whereas in workshop 2 it was best part of 100 or more. So that's the participants and so on. Next slide. So what did we focus on? We got these 2 workshops. We got them to give birth to these 5 areas, and then we tuned these up into research questions. So we needed to know more and get more research about the mental health workforce and their competence and so on. How it is that we could collect outcome data routinely, because we need to know the impact of everything that we do within mental health. We need to have much more research around children and young people and how to help them. There's a real paucity of evidence about what works in kids. We need a big focus on how do we address inequalities. This has been a bugbear for years and years and years in mental health, and we need to know how to address it. And finally, particularly since COVID, is looking at what are what digital interventions can make a difference in mental health. Next slide, please. So those are the key questions. I'm just going to give you one. So the mental health workforce, what are the organisational factors associated with the effective implementation of a peer support work programme in mental health services? Now, this was regarded to be a top priority because we are putting more and more investment in peer support work and peer support workers, which I think is quite right. The thing is, what is it that we need to do to ensure that they are supported, that they have a clear understanding of what they're doing and what their role is, and also what's the outcome of their intervention. And we've done the same for each of those areas. Again, you can read those in your own time. And I think the last slide is next. So next steps. the output of this program of demand signalling is that we are feeding this into the National Institute for Health Research Mental Health Program. We're feeding it into the Accelerated Access Collaborative and Life Sciences Program and into the Mental Health Policy Research Unit. I'm also talking to the Academic Health Science Networks and the ARCs, and the most recently created the Mental Health Implementation Network, which is a sort of group of ARCs and AHSNs who've got together. So we're feeding the work into that. But in the end, we want to have the policy, the service users and carers and the research community all talking to each other, and nice being able to distill from that conversation what really is the best evidence about how things work, and then feeding back in what do we not know enough about. One small caveat, National Institute for Health Research is very aware that the mental health in the north of England and the west of England, mental health research is that there's insufficient capacity to do research, and we are wanting to address that. So that will be a big focus into the future. So that's it. The final slide, which I'm not going to show you, but you can have a look at it yourself. It gives you all the questions that we put together. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that wasn't too fast.
For that. That was absolutely brilliant run through. So I think you've talked about two main areas, the mental health and long-term plan and research. So just if the audience would just like to think what they'd like to ask a question on. And so Gary, you're one of our, Gary has been present this morning, and he is supporting the NIDUS research program, Tim, which I'm sure. Oh God, I've got that wrong. Have diamond studies. I'm having a senior moment. So Gary has been supporting the Diamonds project, which is obviously about diabetes, Tim, and we've had Partha Kar in the audience this morning talk about diabetes as well. So you can see the link there that organisations are doing research with regard to physical health and mental health and joining the gap. So Gary, you'd like to ask us a question? So here comes the microphone. So Gary is one of the participants in the Diamond study.
I'd like to ask two questions in one, actually. One, why isn't, well, I've heard that for the waiting list for CAMS is like 4 years. And also, well, probably that means a child who's 14 who's got mental health problems will be 18 and he can't go into the CAMS. He'll have to try and find a place in the adult mental health services. And also, why aren't the CPNs or anything like that going on the streets and asking people what their problems are and what they can do for the mental health services? That's why there's suicides.
Okay, so thank you, Gary. So I'll just start off by saying that we in Humber, we've got an organisational challenge. We're watching our CAMS waiting list very carefully. There's a number of challenges around that. The demand has absolutely gone up. I think one of the side effects of the benefits of improvement in mental health is increased recognition and acceptance of the fact that children and young people have mental health problems. So that has generated some demand. And one of the other problems or challenges that we've got is actually the workforce. So actually what Tim has outlined, I think, in the long-term plan is a huge amount of investment, in fairness to Tim and Claire Murdoch. They've been very successful of pickpocketing the Treasury. But I'm just wondering if we could think about this from a workforce perspective, Tim, in terms of how long we really think we will have to have that ready-made workforce to deliver this increasing demand.
Okay, so in 2016, we started an investment in children's eating disorder services at the rate of 30 million per year. We thought that would be enough. It wasn't. We increased that to 50 million a year. So by just before the pandemic, we were able to, and we introduced a waiting time into that service. That was the deal. If we put this investment in, we wanted a waiting time. The waiting time was that if any child was referred in urgently, that treatment would have started within a week. And if it was routinely, then treatment would start within 4 weeks. And just before the pandemic, on both of those waiting time figures, we'd reached 85% of children being seen within the requisite time. And I'm pleased to say that 98% of children were seen within 3 months. So there was nobody was beyond, I think, 6 months. So with investment and increasing the workforce, you can do this. Yeah. Sadly, with the increase in eating disorders because of the pandemic, those figures are now down at 70%, even though we are seeing more kids than would have been needed to reach 95% as we'd promised to do. So I think the answer is, I recognise there is a gap, but it can be filled if you've got the money to do it and the workforce that you pay for.
So I think there is something, isn't there, about recognising the activity and the efficiency and the amount of work that's been delivered now compared to 3, 4, 5 years ago because of that investment. But I'm just being honest with ourselves and with citizens and with patients that actually we couldn't have predicted some of this about the pandemic, and actually we're running even faster to catch up to reach those targets. So I can say to you that anyone who works in the NHS at a senior level or at a clinical level is preoccupied with trying to see as many people as quickly as they possibly can, but give them some form of positive experience of that service, as it's a little bit more than just ticking a box. So hopefully, Gary, that sort of teases out some of that. Any other questions either on the long term? So next up is the Right Honourable Caroline Flint, the Trust Chair. Tim, Caroline, over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Tim, for your presentation. I mean, workforce is a very difficult area, and of course, it's not only just in mental health, but across the health community, the need for more personnel in different areas. So we're all, there's a danger that we're all fighting in a pot for those people. But when it comes to places, it's great to hear that there's plus 27,000 more people coming through. But what influence and what does the research tell you about how you incentivise those people coming through to go to the places that most need them? Because there's no doubt that in the north of England, there are particular problems in areas, and Humber as well is facing this, about attracting the pipeline to come into our area. So is there something about workforce and the research you're doing to tell you how better you might, through the training programs, through the placements, incentivise personnel to go into those areas, or think about what more could be done to support those areas to sustain the staff when they've done their placements or work here, or attract them in?
It's a very, very good question, Caroline, and one well taken. I do think that the north of England, which I work in Sheffield, that's where I live and I was brought up there. I'm absolutely aware that there are greater difficulties in the north in attracting people into mental health, but also into mental health research, and that's one of the key things we want to do something about. What I will say, which is not, it doesn't fully answer what you're asking, Caroline, because I'm not sure I can, but one of the things that we are doing is that we are investing in new models of working and new types of roles. So I'm very aware that there are lots of people who have had mental health problems who would like to work in mental health, and they've got a lot to offer. We are also aware that there's a huge number of graduate psychologists who would love to work in clinical psychology, but they can't get in. And both of those groups are representing a really important source of people that we can train in new roles. So, for example, in schools where we are investing significant money, that in schools we're recruiting educational mental health practitioners, and they're being trained on the job, a one-year program, and they're trained to do evidence-based interventions that you can do in schools, and a group of us did the systematic review that sits behind that. And we're getting between 30 and 100 applicants per place. So now that's one area. We've also got IAPT, which is another new area. We're wanting to develop new kinds of workers across different parts of mental health, as well as getting Health Education England to train more nurses, more doctors, etc. And that's probably the bit that is most problematic, is getting the right funding for Health Education England. But I'm aware it's difficult. And I know that there are places that have done things like tried to pay more money to consultants, for example, to attract them to their area. Which I'm not sure is a great move, but I can see why people do it. So I don't know if that goes any way towards answering some of your concerns, Caroline.
So Tim, thank you for that. No, I think in fairness, you've explained that there's a little bit of patching up the ship today, and hopefully, we have something a little bit more sustainable going forward. With regard to the trained professionals, which are nurses and medics and psychologists, because they take quite a long time to come down through the system. And it's interesting you raised the point about what we do or don't do, incentivising clinical colleagues to come to work for us. I think my reflection as a medical director is, because of the regulatory pressures, because of the organisational pressures, because of the challenges our patients, particularly up here in the North, face, that sometimes we just have to do whatever it takes. And I won't apologise for that, nor will some of my colleagues, but I wish there was an easier solution, but I think it's going to take time to fix. So Tim, look, I'm really grateful for you joining us this morning. As ever, you're always been a good sport, but I think you would have been pleased to hear about, particularly in terms of research, that the fact that an organisation such as ours is actively engaged in a Diamond study and an IDA study, that we are convinced that the best way to improve outcomes for our patients, that research and education has a part of that. And I know you've been very passionate about that. And there's a lot more money coming down the track because of the work that you're doing in that. So thank you from our team.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Tim. So moving swiftly on. So round of applause. I think Tim is now gone. Thank you very much. So next up, we've got Margaret Ipko, who is an old friend of ours, and actually Margaret came along, I think it was last year, and presented all of the brilliant research work that she as a GP does out in Holderness. And actually we were very, very jealous of what Margaret was doing. Incredibly jealous, Margaret. And actually I felt like cutting you off the link because I was so jealous about the brilliant research work you did. But anyway, we'd like to think we learned from you. We went off, we persuaded a few people in the CRN to give us some money. We've invested in our own research nurse. We've appointed one of our GPs as a lead into research across her 8 surgeries. So I have to say, one of the positive benefits of you joining us last year and sharing your experience, that actually prompted us to getting up and doing something about it. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk for the next 15 to 20 minutes. I know your time limited because you're trying to do other stuff as well. If you want a job done, give it to a busy person. And if you want to finish a little bit early so we can have a bit of a Q&A, that would be fantastic too. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, John?
Perfectly.
Okay, that's great. I apologise for the background noise. I'm in London at the college, and they have this policy of having all the windows open for obvious reasons, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum. So my first task is to try and share my slides. Right, I'm hoping you can all see this. Okay.
Full marks, we can see it all.
Thank you very much. So I'm a GP in Holderness, and I've been there for about 10 years now. For those of you that don't know me, thank you very much for having me back. I'm also the Vice Chair-elect for Professional Development Standards at the college, and that starts this week, and that's why I'm here today. So last year was really interesting because we presented all the kind of studies we were doing in practice, and I know what you're saying, John, but even I was kind of overwhelmed by it all when I finished. And something that struck us soon after that conference was we had to turn down a rather big COVID vaccination study. But one of the main reasons the team had to turn it down was because we couldn't figure out how logistically it would work, because it needed some sort of collaboration between us and secondary care. And it was interesting just listening to Tim just now about trying to get rid of the gap between primary and secondary care. And we thought about particularly delivery of research at the primary secondary care interface. How can we make it better? Because ultimately, by turning these big studies down that could potentially have great benefit for our patients are missing out. So we kind of got together, myself, Catherine from Humber, and the Trust, and we actually came up with an initiative called Triple Helix. So it encompasses the whole HHH, which is Humber, Hull and Holderness. And the idea was, the plan was basically to set up a community link team, as it were, to try and look at how we can engage our patients more, but not because the patients, essentially, some come to see us and they only stay in primary care, but a vast majority of those are also based in the community and in secondary care. So how can we provide a journey that's seamless, where we're all understanding each other? So that was the rationale behind it at the time. So there was a couple of questions we needed to ask ourselves: why, what, how, who, when, where. So the why I've just kind of alluded to, and another study that was a bit of a trigger was something called the Aviva project. So this was something that we were already doing, and this was one of the studies that probably sowed the seed. And it was looking at type 2 diabetics and how we could improve their outcomes in terms of reversing their diabetes through very low calorie diets under the supervision of a dietitian. And so we had someone from the Trust, from the endocrine department, approach Aviva, who was sponsored by Nestle. I have no affiliation with Nestle, just to stress that, and our CCG and us. And it was quite challenging, but even through COVID and lockdown, quite a number of our patients engaged, and we have a significant number of them that have managed to reverse the diabetes, so much so that they've actually rolled this program out nationally now. So it's something that patients up and down the country can access. Then some of you may have read Chris Whitty's report on coastal deprivation. And obviously where we are, we have a lot of coastal communities. And in Holderness, we're very aware of particularly our patients who are on caravan sites. And although there's a terminology that people say, well, they're hard to reach, but actually we know where they are. I think Gary in the audience said, well, why can't you just go up to people and ask them what it is that they want? And so we thought, well, surely we can do this. So we now have a Trailblazer GP, and a Trailblazer GP is someone who specifically looks at tackling those health inequalities in practice, and that's Dr. Marston for us at Withensea. The other challenge that we have in primary care and secondary care is we don't have a unified database. So we all have different systems and information kind of gets lost. Now, I don't have a particular answer for that. I was just speaking to a Dutch colleague and they have a seamless system where everybody can see everything about the patient on one homogeneous system, and that would be wonderful. But how can we kind of overcome all those things? And there's other things that we are also encouraged to consider, things like the environment. And a lot of practices now are signing up to be greener practices. But what does that actually mean in practice for us as individuals and for our patients? And there is a study that I'll mention right at the end, or a project rather, that we haven't been involved in that's been very, very successful in reducing our carbon footprint. And of course, how are we going to do this? Who's missing? Whenever we try to consider these things, who is missing from our team? I must say that since this project has evolved, it's clear that it's not just about us, Humber and the Trust. There are so many community groups, particularly those that we know exist in our communities, who aren't asked. And someone said to me from it's a group called HACA, I think the Hull Afro-Caribbean Association. And she said this, she said, Margaret, often when we're approached by research entities or organisations, it's with our own agenda, but no one actually asks us, what does this actually mean to you? And I found that was a really profound statement, and it's something that we really do need to explore a lot more. And where are we going to do this? You know, Alistair Hall from the CRN talks about place-based research, but because of the lockdown, essentially with the COVID, because we're all working differently, I mean, we're in a hybrid conference, which is working fantastically, I must say. What does place-based research actually mean? And obviously we've now got problems with our estates, and so that these were quite logistical challenges. And we're all acutely aware of the pressures on secondary care, particularly with the acute trust, and also general practices are struggling at the moment to meet the demands of a population that needs them. Where are we going to find the time to do this? And I see it all the time, particularly not just in my own practice. When I've gone around Humber practices, you know, I get this look like, you know, you're talking about research, Margaret. We need to maintain face-to-face and deal with the now, today, but trying to encourage people to think about research is really quite challenging, and because it is pivotal to treating those diseases now for tomorrow, if that makes any sense. It's really, really important. So I've almost kind of, I'm just looking at this slide and thinking of the rationale. So I think I've actually touched on most of these, but the benefits, I must stress, of the staff. People are looking to do other things that provide job satisfaction, and that's something that's coming through time and time again. And it's not just our GPs, it's all our other roles, our paramedics, our pharmacists. They're all really keen to get involved as long as they've got the headspace to do it. And part of the funding we got from the CRN allowed us to have some headspace to actually think about how we do this in care. So I'm going to just talk quickly about 3 projects that we've been involved in and how that's worked across the 3 organisations. So we've got a pipeline study, so I'm kind of limited in what I can say because it's still in setup, but essentially this is a vaccine study for patients over the age of 60 who have recurrent urinary tract infections, which is a real problem for a lot of our patients over the age of 60. And what they're looking for is whether a vaccine is effective in reducing the recurrences that they have. And it's a randomized control study. It's double-blinded, and so the patient and the giver of the vaccine do not know what they're receiving. But the challenge that we have at the moment is what they're looking to, what the outcomes are. How many of those patients that are in the trial end up in our acute trust with, say, for example, sepsis? So at the moment, what we're trying to work our way around is how do we notify the trust, or how does the patient tell the trust, particularly if they're very ill, that they're part of this study, because there are particular activities that need to be picked up once that patient is admitted. Fortunately, although the CRN have given us, I think it's about 35 grand for the whole project in itself, it does get swallowed up very quickly because of the time that, you know, you've got GPs, pharmacists, research nurses. But this study, which has been sponsored by a commercial organisation, recognised that actually what you're doing for Triple Helix is quite groundbreaking, they think, and they've actually suggested that they may be able to give us funding for a community link worker. So it's actually reaping benefits already. The study that we finished, so we completed this study, this is called the Hellewell study. So it's looking at patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And we have a researcher from HIMSS, our local medical school, and some of you may know Dr. Crooks from the Trust, who have looked at care reviews and patient views with regards to how they were managed pre and post COVID. So we've recruited quite well to the study, and we've recruited to targets. I'm really, really proud about that one. But this is one of the groundbreaking projects, I think, that is now being rolled out nationally. It's called the Sentinel Project, and the blue inhalers, what we call the short-acting bronchodilators, they account for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions from the inhalers. And in Hull, we have one of the highest number of prescriptions per patient every year. And what we're looking at, so our PCM, which is our primary care network, the medical school and Huth, along with sponsored by AstraZeneca, is looking at a multifaceted intervention. So they brought patients on board and designed this project with patients and with staff feedback. How can we reduce the carbon footprint for some of these inhalers that we don't actually, people aren't particularly being managed very well with them? And the outcomes were phenomenal. Following specific pathways, we went from being literally, as a PCN, one of the, if you look at the dotted blue line in the middle, that's the national average. We went from being the sort of top red line, which is the top PCN, probably nationally in terms of prescriptions, to less than the lower than the national average. 2 PCNs joined us, so we're 3 PCNs together. And across the 3 PCNs, this project only started, I think, in February. Ali, if you're here, you can correct me if I've got the timings wrong. But across the 3 PCNs, we've had a reduction of inhalers, 9,000, which is phenomenal. And if you want to put that into sort of air mileage terms, it's the equivalent of about 300 transatlantic flights. So for me, I mean, this is a pivotal project in terms of how we can collaborate better with our communities, involving our communities, and actually addressing national agendas, which actually there is a greener impact statement that's outlined in the NHS long-term plan. So it's been absolutely phenomenal. So really, John, that's pretty much triple helix, and that's pretty much all I had to say. But it's a community link approach that I'm really excited about, and perhaps one of the spin-offs. I must thank Humber, because I suspect maybe if I hadn't been here this time last year, this may never have evolved with yourselves. So for that, I am and my team are eternally grateful. So thank you.
So Margaret, thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour through the work that you are leading. I'm going to start with an admission and seek forgiveness from you, because if you had tried to tell me half an hour ago that you could do something around asthma management, which would make a big difference to the environment, I would have gone, yeah. And I'm just blown away by that. And actually, maybe that's just another hook for professionals and citizens that we work with in thinking about the benefits of improved treatments and improved managements in terms of what the environmental would affect, because 300 plane flights is quite a lot. So I'm going to open up to the audience. We have a couple of minutes just to see if anyone would like to quiz Margaret with a tricky question. It's going to have to be very tricky to catch her out, though. Very tricky. So, anyone like to ask Margaret a question? Because if you don't, I will. Margaret, one of the challenges for, I think, folk like yourself who are highly engaged in researcher education is how do you persuade your colleagues that you're doing the real work and the important stuff, and you don't just have to sit behind a desk all day and do the usual stuff? Is that a challenge for you?
It is. I mean, if bribery doesn't work, then there's nothing like a pandemic. And I'll give you a quick story. So we were asked this very question because we recently merged as an entity. We were 3 practices that were struggling, and then 3 years ago said, right, for us to survive, we need to get together. And research. Sometimes you as an organisation, you want to drop the things that you don't think are important. And so I think research was probably high on their agenda, to say the least. And someone actually said to me, but what will happen when all the research dries up? Then what? And then, of course, literally weeks later, COVID hit our shores, and we were in a real privileged position because we were a swabbing practice for Public Health England at the time, and we still are. So for the last 10 years, we've been involved in the research surveillance scheme. And as a result of that, in February last year, we were able to go into our care homes, train our care staff to swab their residents that were symptomatic. And so we were very quickly able to, because my worry when we're looking at Spain and Italy and the death rates there was quite scary. How are we going to protect our care homes here when we didn't have a test and trace strategy in place? However, because we were part of a research network that were already swabbing for COVID, we could do that quite quickly. We did that for our carers, and we did that for our staff. And I don't think anyone has come back to us to ask us about the importance of research since then, because it had a profound impact on us all.
So, Margaret, I think it's fair to say general practice has been under sustained attack in certain media circles. And I think anyone who's been listening here in the room today would probably going away thinking, thank God for general practice and thank God for GPs like yourself, because how you keep the show on the road in difficult circumstances and do the other stuff is beyond me. And I suspect your testing programme, which you started last year, and probably didn't cost £38 billion, and I just might leave it on that controversial note. So, so look, you've been a brilliant sport. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. I know you've been very busy down in London too, and fingers crossed, please God, that we will see you in person next year when we come back. But you've been a godsend, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for having me.
So through the magic of watches, we've got back to being on time, and we have 5 minutes left in our 2021 annual research conference. So I'm going to hand over the floor now to the Right Honourable Caroline Flint, our Trust Chair, for some closing thoughts and comments. But before you do that, Caroline, I would just like to say to my research team, and I know that if I forget some names, I'm at risk of offending people, but you've just done a phenomenal job, Catherine and Alison and other people who've been involved in getting the programme up and running. I'm really grateful for all of the speakers who've joined us over the last couple of days, and I'm really appreciative of the trust that the support it gives to research, not just through income, but actually just being here in the room and recognising its importance, because I think research is a team sport. So with that note, Caroline, I'll leave the floor to you, and thank you.
Thanks, John, and just to say to everybody involved in the events over the last 2 days, you know, it takes a lot of organisation to get something like this together. You are unbelievable. Well done, well done. Look, I mean, I think it's interesting today. I mean, yesterday was interesting. Today's been fantastic. I have to say, Partha sort of had me at Star Trek with his opening presentation, and some people already know, but as you get to know me, you know me, I'm a massive film buff. So I think I've already got a challenge with Partha that I'm going to see where I can integrate films into whatever I say going forward, and he's going to do the same. And apparently there is a movie medics club that he leads, so apparently I might have a gig at that event whenever it might happen. But no, it's been fascinating. And then to end with Margaret, and as you said, John, I mean, I like visuals. Visuals help me understand, and I think they're, you know, a help to communicate sometimes better than words what our endeavours are all about. And that image of, you know, 9,000 inhalers, inhaler prescriptions not happening, a reduction, and that's equivalent to 300 transatlantic flights. Watch out, that's going to pop up in a few contributions I make over the months ahead. This is my first Humber Research Conference. And, you know, I only started in this post in September, and, you know, part of my objective myself was to try as best I could, given some of the restrictions we've got on coming together, to meet people, get to know the organisation. Obviously, I get involved in formal conversations at board, but those more informal discussions and opportunity. And I suppose one thing I've learned throughout my life, and the various jobs I've had along the way, many of which I never thought I would end up doing when I was about 18, is that actually learning is so important, and being open to learning is really important, no matter, you know, how old you get, no matter what you do. And when my children, who are all adults now, were at school and they would complain to me about homework, I would just say every day's a homework day for me, you know. So don't give me any complaints. Every day is a homework day for me. And the reason why learning is so important is that, you know, individuals on our own, you know, we can have our own ideas about what's happening around us. Obviously, we can all have lots of anecdotal evidence that comes in front of us that affects the way we think. And that's important. There's a place for that. There's a place for that in our learning. But actually to sort of, you know, nail it and really influence public policy and how we spend money and how we deliver our services, you know, having that research, that evidence to really inform what we do is so vitally important. And what I think is so great about yesterday and today is that we've gone through, you know, Professor Semple with a sort of, you know, that sort of national research that dips into every aspect of the NHS to get that data out, to put it into the graphs, to put it into the research and present it to government on the level that is about, you know, fighting for our lives in the eye of a pandemic. To important as well, some of those smaller projects that we cannot wait for national policy to deliver, whether it's through NHS England, whether it's through government policy. It's something we can actually do here right now. But importantly, those smaller projects that are so meaningful because they really are directly involving our staff, our patients, our communities, and can have an impact in the near time rather than maybe down the road. How we then share that best practice so that others can learn from this? And how can we learn from the sort of research activities happening elsewhere? If I have one frustration that has followed me throughout my time in that sort of public policy arena is, you know, I was a constituency MP living in Doncaster, where I still live, and, you know, was always interested in what was happening on my own patch. But as a minister and involved with other things that were close to me in terms of, you know, public policy, I got amazing opportunity to go and see some of the best practice around the country. And my big frustration was, for goodness sake, you know, people are doing the work. They understand what's happening. Why aren't we taking what works and leveling that up? Leveling up's a big phrase at the moment. Leveling that up, scaling that up, so that actually we can learn from each other, but importantly, not have to keep reinventing the wheel all the time. And I think, you know, what's really inspiring about the projects, large and small, that we've heard about in the last 48 hours is that here in Humber, we're playing our part to add to that. And not only does it help our patients, but I hope it also signals to all our staff and those who might think of coming to work with us that we are an organisation that is constantly learning, that we feel we can learn from those who work for us and those for whom we provide our services and those others that we work with within the community and further afield. And that actually this is a very inspiring environment in which to come and work in. And I think that's a really big message from today. And importantly, as an anchor organisation for the area that we serve, is our contribution to the Humber being that area that is known for the research it does and the learning and the value it puts on learning. Look, I'll just leave it to the words of one of our research champions, and that's another thing we have in the organisation. Those research champions, staff, service users and others who will bang the drum about the research activities they're involved in. This is a lady who's living with dementia. She said, "We have to normalise involvement in research, but to do this we must have the backing of all healthcare professionals. The NHS can't move forward without research, and research can't move forward without willing volunteers." Too true. We need hope, and research gives us that hope. Without research, we can't change the future. Enough said. Thank you.